Thank you for watching Fireside. If you enjoyed this podcast, consider liking and subscribing to be notified when future episodes release. Enjoy. Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Fireside. Today is kind of a unique moment in time for Fireside because this is the first episode where we have a moderator, a developer on Oldschool Runescape here to join us and speak about their work in the game and just generally talk about games and the current discourse surrounding them, I guess. We have here Mod Grub, someone who is behind some of the coolest parts visually of old school RuneScape, conceptualizing some of the coolest areas that I personally have seen, and someone who has had experience working in both RuneScape 3 and old school RuneScape. So, welcome, Mod Grub. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Theory. That was a hell of an introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
I'm known for some introductions. Thank you again for joining, and it's honestly such a pleasure to have someone who works on the game. I feel like most of the people that watch my channel are really passionate about, so it's great.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm very excited to get into it.
Awesome. Well, the first thing I wanna just touch on is just old school RuneScape. Your work in old school. You're a concept artist, and before I even get into that, can you quickly go over what you do as a concept artist? What's your role in the company?
Yes, yeah, it's a strange one. My definition of what it means to be a concept artist changed over the 15 years I've been doing it. And with old school especially, it's become a kind of almost an archaeological job of kind of we've inherited this extremely bespoke art style with a kind of really unbelievable origin when you start to take it apart. And we have the duty of adding visually more to it. We want the world to grow and expand, feel alive, feel like there's more to come. So you have to visually add more and grow this world while at the same time preserving this capsule of time that it represents and these set of values that the art style and actually the entire game through the audio, the game design. There's a set of consistent values which in different mediums are expressed uniformly, and I can get into that later. It's a bit of a deeper topic, but as a concept artist, principally, I am involved in shepherding the visual style and making sure that it's preserved through time, while at the same time going and moving with the present moment, being real about what old school is in the present day, what is driving it, what the players see it as, what its potential is, where it's going. That style actually has to adapt, and it's constantly in negotiation. So it's also a product of negotiating with the players and with the market. Where can we take old school visually? So I'll be involved in one instance with working on HD and working with the team intensely, working with our art manager, our director, uh, fleshing that out. And then the next minute, it will be working on, for example, we've just started production on Blood Moon Rises. Pre-production is pretty much wrapped up, and we've now earnestly begun production. While at the same time, we're kind of right at the end of the road for the production cycle of Sailing. Two vastly different projects, and for both of those, it's a lot of conversations about what the game mechanic is, how we can visually translate that on Sailing. The boats, for example, there's just tremendous amount of visual design going on there to make boats work and integrate with the gameplay, while at the same time feeling like they belong in old school RuneScape, which is quite frankly almost an impossible task. And therein is also an example of the negotiation that's constantly happening. Um,
For sure.
hey, I've rambled there, Theory. That
No,
was
no,
a
no,
lot.
no, 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 no. Listen, it's all interesting stuff, and it's an interesting point you're coming from because something I mentioned to a couple of the people I spoke to, some of my friends, is that I'm sitting down with a concept artist at Jagex, right? Like someone who has really spent a lot of time understanding the art style and what the game looks like. And the first question one of my buddies wanted me to ask, and it's great you brought all this up because I feel like it's such a great question to ask as a follow up, is, and I think I know the answer to this, is what does the concept art for old school look like? And the reason this is an interesting question is because oftentimes people associate concept art with like ideal visuals and inspiration. But in old school, it's kind of different in some ways too, where the concept art is actually very representative of what the game looks like. You're using the same, I don't want to say low poly because you're not operating with traditional polygons when you're making art, but just looking at the concept art you've created, it's very connected to the possible visuals of the game itself. Can you talk me through that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, that's going to help me actually labour the point about how my definition of what a concept artist is and does in the games industry and what their value is, how that's changed over time. Every product has its own function, really, with concept art. If you go kind of way back, you look at John Howe's illustrations for Lord of the Rings, or you look at the original concept art for God of War, or they all have different functions. Typically, if your art style is quite has quite a high bandwidth. It's kind of like it's quite a close visual representation. The art is much more about inspiring the team, getting kind of like an emotive direction. Its function can be a lot more ephemerate in that sense. And then the more kind of retrograde your style becomes, and also the more crystallized that style becomes in the character of something, just like old school RuneScape, it's very kind of strange art style has become enculturated. Um, you, it's less about though it's still important to inspire people. I don't know if you've seen any of the concept art for Yama or A Kingdom Divided. A lot of that stuff really pushes the limits of what the art style of old school RuneScape is about. But in the same time, it's the right place to do it because it's a raid and it's kind of the penultimate experience of well, anyone going into that experience would have, up until that point, spent thousands of hours getting to that moment. So it is an epic moment in an otherwise what is an otherwise very kind of humble game. One of the values I was speaking about earlier is old school RuneScape demands that you don't actually take yourself too seriously. So doing things like a raid, it's one of the few moments where actually it's fair to be sincere and take things seriously. In that instance, you can see the art style has it sounds a bit ridiculous, but it has more triangles, and we allow ourselves more topological freedom to go a little bit more realistic and be more earnest. So
Definitely.
they're always
Oh, and I'm
please go
sorry,
on.
I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I definitely see what you're talking about. I think that, and this is only tangentially related, really, but the position that I have on concept art, not like in general, I'm not a concept artist, but just the position that art has in evoking something with old school is that I always like one of two extremes when it comes to discussing the art of old school. I'm a little bit critical of, like, for example, the really smooth Blender animations that have become very popular in the past few years. I like old school, being either a kind of gritty, jittery, kind of like old, very ancient looking PS1 era. I think there's a lot of beauty in that
Yeah.
Z-buffery kind of aesthetic. Or I
Mhm.
love it as this like super high fantasy, high polished, high fidelity piece of art. People always
Yeah.
talk about their favorite promo images from back in the day before I even played, right? The Vorkath
Mhm.
one. And you're kind of evoking something
Yeah.
similar with the TOA art you did, right? Of entering the pyramid. I believe that's the
Mhm.
art you might have been referring to there. Like, that is that same level of, it's evoking an emotion. It's not representative of what the game was going to look like, but it's evoking an emotion there,
Yeah.
and a tease for what it might feel like for players who do play the game. And that's
Yes.
those are two different extremes that I think they both have their place.
Yeah, you've nailed it. That's exactly the kind of gamut of what a concept artist is trying to achieve, especially on old school. Typically, about 80% of the work is a very literal conversation about the 3D form and trying to execute what we're trying to execute in an extremely like if you look at the kind of gory anatomy on Baba in AKD or the way the wrappings are on. God, I'm forgetting his name right now. It's crazy that I'm forgetting my own drawing's name. Um,
Which boss?
the he's like a mummy. He walks around on the circular arena.
Oh, Akka.
Yeah,
Yeah, Akka,
yeah,
right? This has the
yeah,
memory
yeah.
attack. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
That's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So Akka's raps, like trying to solve how do you talk about mummified raps in a couple triangles and a rectangle. There's like a real kind of bizarre shape design challenge for old school, and kind of cracking that. Even during Tombs of Massacre, I hadn't. We were still kind of chewing it, myself and Jerv, and really the whole art team. We were really chewing at it. Mod Ghost before us, he'd done a lot of incredible work. Mod West, Mod Rye. There's a long list. We've inherited a long list of really incredible artists. So there's the concept artist role, and when I joined, I was the first official concept artist. So the kind of the initial work was to just kind of lock this thing down and quantify exactly in shape design and fine art language what's happening here, so we can kind of crystallize that.
a
And
hundred
it
percent.
really
And
It's
again, I
Go ahead.
apologize for cutting you off. It's such a bad habit of mine when when I have like something I really want to add on to what you're saying. It's again to all my viewers. I'm sorry, but I I totally see where you're coming from, and I just wanted to add really quickly that TOA, like Tomes of Amascut, especially, um, they were. I remember looking at them before I even played Old School and getting like really excited about eventually getting there because the art was so polished and so interesting and so well done. I also want to shout out the animation team behind Tombs of
Yeah.
Amascut. I think the animations there, and with Desert Treasure 2, which we'll talk about in a moment, the animations there are incredibly good for what they're
Mhm.
doing within the old school RuneScape like creative space.
Mhm. So 2 points. You have to interrupt me because I will keep going. And 2, you could the conversation we'll have today, you could take any discipline in the old school team, um, and they will be able to give the exact same conversation with their own, kind of, discipline bent, and the animators, especially over the last 5 years, have exploded. Our whole team size has exploded, so there's a lot of incredible talent going on right now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with Tombs of Amascut and quite frankly the Desert Treasure 2 areas. I know you've conceptualized a couple of them. I believe most of them, if not all of them. And we'll talk about them in specific from in a moment. But I just want to pull back for a moment and talk about just the art style of the game in general. Do you guys operate on a Bible? And for the viewers who aren't aware of what that is, it's essentially like a binding document. A lot of games, animated TV shows, movies all operate on a Bible that kind of outlines what you the do's and don'ts of drawing within the art style of that project. Is there a Bible for old school RuneScape?
The short answer is no. The more complex answer is, we're working on it. We're
Oh,
currently on
interesting.
the 3rd iteration. Initially, it was it was enormous trying to, like I said, quantify all of the kind of niche edge cases of how to use old school RuneScape style, and eventually that simply becomes a document that exists, but it isn't a living document. It's not something that people can practically use. So the work has been to kind of distill down, the art style of old school RuneScape to kind of almost one-liners. So you probably hear me today say a bunch of stuff, and that is the conversation even we're having now, where we're probing what this thing is all, what's required to kind of quantify what this thing is. We've got HD coming as well, which is about to kind of add an entirely new dimension to the art style rules. So as you can tell, when we start to break, sailing has just introduced a whole new set of shape languages. The sea has never had multiple depths before; it's just been one texture, and now it's a living, environment that is, the map is essentially doubled in size. So the art style as well is constantly evolving, while at the same time needing to remain crystallized, and the same documents take a bit of time to kind of galvanize. And up until this point, we've not been finally successful. It's a living thing. It is an oral tradition currently, if you want the truth.
That's fascinating, right? The griots of the RuneScape, the old school RuneScape scene, relaying the oral traditions of old, and that's something that's interesting, right? I'm going to use the evil E word for a second and say evolution of old school's art style. That's something that people they both are aware of it and aren't. There's often this thing of like, oh, old school's keeping everything old, but that's not really true. I think the art style for old school RuneScape is actually quite different to what it once was, to what RuneScape once was. And I've always viewed RuneScape as having multiple different eras of art within it. And old school RuneScape is pretty cohesive, but even then it has like two eras, I would say, that it combines, where like the original RuneScape 2 on release, I think in '04, had a pretty distinct style with very low poly sorry, yeah, low res texture to say,
Mhm.
not low poly, low res texturing on rooftops, on trees. That's still something that retained in today's game more often than not. But you have these areas like Yanil, right? Like old Varrock prior to its rework, which we're obviously living in the reworked Varrock now. These older areas, they are visibly different. And around the time in late 2006 and 2007, there was a pretty distinct pivot in what the art for old school, or not old school, what RuneScape was at the time. I don't remember, but I can look at something like God Wars Dungeon 1 and see how visibly different the way that I think there was a distinct pivot to like shaded polygons. I don't know if that's the correct word to use, but essentially there was baked in shading to the low poly assets that gave them more depth, but there was a removal of some of the reliance on overt low res textures. And that's the style, that like latter change in 2007, 2006, that the old school team, I think, has embraced more so than the older style. Can you
Mm.
verify that or comment on that?
Yeah, it's, honestly, it's actually really difficult to for me, the line isn't too hard and fast, and in fact, the harder answer to accept is that the game is multifaceted, and then the work is to know when to deploy which style that does exist at the time slice. And also, we've done a lot of backporting. We brought in Next, we brought in a whole bunch of stuff, and sometimes, for example, like the Majorats, we could have just ripped the textures off, but in that instance, Moded and I felt quite strongly that they needed to be reauthored to fit what we understood was the median of the style, and we're glad we did that. But other times we've just kind of almost lock, stock, and barrel re-imported or inherited assets that maybe full on the larger extent, the kind of more later, anything 2008, 2009 starts to get a little bit, you have to question it sometimes. But the truth is the
Yeah.
game isn't as consistent as we'd like. It's a hard answer to give.
Yeah, it's interesting because that style that I'm referring to, that 2007 pivot to God Wars Dungeon 1-esque vibe that I think that most of old school RuneScape's assets today fit, the newer ones fit that aesthetic. Um, that was, I guess, embraced by in 2007 and then immediately changed in 2008 with the HD version of the game releasing. That was such an interesting
Mm,
timeline for me to observe, where I'm like, you guys have found this new art style, you started creating assets within it. I think the hill giants were created within it, the fire giants obviously use the same skeleton but were created within it, and you recreated them. They used to look different before then, and then now they inhabit this new um text not textured, shaded polygon style, I call it. And
mm,
then in 2008, it's like, no, we're going HD. And then we're adding all these textures to everything. We're texturing over everything. Personally,
mm,
some people are really fond of that. I don't like that as much. I think that like harsh texturing that is applied to a lot of 2008, 2009 assets doesn't really fit that well. And I think it looks a bit garish sometimes. I much prefer the more clay look, the sculpted clay look of old school RuneScape to that. So I was really excited when you guys announced the HD version that you're not going over with a texture on everything, at least from what I've seen, and you're just mostly going into lighting and fog simulations or cloud simulations or something like that. And I'm like, and maybe reworking some of the water. All that stuff to me fits really well and enhances the very clay aesthetic. I don't know if clay is the correct like comparison there, but that's the
yeah.
vibe it
I
gives me.
imagine. No, I think clay's an apt description. There's no specularity, there's no metalness, or everything's just kind of this uniform matte kind of clay material. It's kind of Lego, or I don't know. There's a uniformity to it that's quite appealing. I think once you get all the textures in there, and you kind of liberally apply those textures, especially if you turn on the tile blending, so you lose those kind of checkerboard tiles,
Mhm.
which I love because it's a unique art representation, but simultaneously it's a gameplay benefit to see the tiles that
Yeah.
aid you clicking. So it's one of those nice areas where there's a decent overlap. Yeah, you kind of I think I there was the game has been alive for a very, very long time, and as such, you can kind of view it in all of the graphical eras, and but typically it's inherited almost every single one. I for my sins on RuneScape 3, the
Mhm.
vogue game at the time then, and probably still is to many respects today, was World of Warcraft. And the effect World of Warcraft had on the visual landscape of gaming and of the psyche of artists working at that time was very strong. Like a lot of people were very unconsciously moving in that direction. And I think that there was a period where kind of RuneScape before, I mean, even during the incarnation of old school, it was kind of going on this wayward path where it lost its original identity. It knew it had to move on to something. But in the journey of doing so, it kind of put on all the masks of all the different stylistic vogues in the MMO space pretty strictly at the time. And I think that I don't think that's where they're at now, and I think the place where the graphics are for RuneScape 3 these days is actually arrived at something that's an original expression, and the team over there kind of continue to nail that and anchor down on it. But old school, especially, I was very weary that hopefully this isn't a tangent. I think I'm about to go on a tangent. I've got that strange feeling, but
That's all right.
there's a lot of us on old school that feel very strongly that we need to resist that. But it's the most difficult thing because you have to purge yourself of all these kind of unconscious preferences. For me, it's I love Warhammer. Warhammer is a massive feature in my life. Has been from a kid. I was playing, RuneScape way back in school when I was a wee lad, while at the same time being in the garage painting some orcs. Like those two things kind of made it, and then throw Lord of the Rings into that mix, and then you've kind of got Mod Grub's kind of visual psyche. So I have to do a lot of work to purge a lot of that and make sure that I'm actually sitting with old school itself and being honest with that. But that's a discipline that a lot of, I'll be completely frank, a lot of artists never even earnestly begin that path. I'm only doing it this rigorously because I work on old school, and if I make a mistake and suddenly I do something that looks like strangely like Aragon running around in old school, I'm going to get called out on it, and it's not going to work. So the game is that stringent, and that art style must be preserved to such a degree that, um, yeah, you have to purge all that stuff.
And there's
That was a
still
lesson I had to learn by.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go
Continue.
ahead.
I was just gonna say like, and there's still like, I'm not gonna say they're missteps because I have my own opinions on them, but there's community perceived missteps, not necessarily from you, but from some of the old school team on the creation of some assets, right? I think that if I remember correctly, I say remember as in I didn't play at the time, but I remember hearing about it nowadays. Is some people are very not super into the elf rework that happened around the time Prifddinas was
Yeah.
released. Personally, I like the elves in old school RuneScape. I certainly like them a lot more than what they were back in 2004 and 5, but they looked, in my opinion, there's a very distinct difference between ugly and old school RuneScape, but I would say some of the assets back then, especially, were just ugly to me. I think elves were one of them, where I'm just like, and mammoths are today, where I'm just like, they just are
Uh,
not appealing to look at and look very jarring. So I actually like some of the changes made there, but
yeah.
there's still, I guess, community perceived errors with the team's art. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. For sure. Hey, Mammoths is a really good touchstone here, actually, and also the old school RuneScape croc, that really OG croc that kind of shuffles along the ground.
Oh yeah, yeah.
There's there's some incredible models. The stuff with like Jerv and I deliberately bring that. We consider that the salt and pepper. And
Mhm.
if you can't tank that stuff, we would never make a mammoth today. We would never make a croc today. I don't think we'd be allowed to, quite frankly. But I will defend that it would be the most old school thing we could possibly do with the license. Certainly, if an abyssal job comes my way, I will be channeling mammoth energy big time. Some of the demons in this game are crazy. So it's a wild thing when you really start to take it. And you're gonna in this conversation, I'm just gonna highlight as well how hard it is to find consistent rules in this art
Yeah.
style.
Was it Jerv who made Zebak, the big crocodile in TOA?
We kind of collabed on that. I worked on Zabak,
Mhm.
but Jerv gave me a lot of she like kind of pretty much did 50% of the work. So we can claim that as a 50/50.
That's a great example, I think, of the difference between modern and modern old school RuneScape and old school RuneScape from a crocodile perspective. I
For sure.
love Zebak. Zebak is like, I would say Zebak and Mutadile, I don't know why they're both crocodiles, are both like some of my favorite assets in the entire game. There's just something so like, I just love what the old school like RuneScape art team, animation team can do with like really large assets and how they can make them function in the game world. And I know there was a lot of
Mm.
issues with implementing something as big as Zebak. I think I think he's literally in two parts, right? Because he's so big. But I just love that vibe so much. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh man, the early meetings kicking off Teams of a Mascot were some of the ideas being thrown around. It's a miracle that the animation team, the environment team, it's a miracle any of us were pulling this off. Honest to God, if anyone listening has used a modern game engine, we are. It is. I cannot stress how much it is not like that. And but strangely enough, HD is coming. Just as a tangent, I'm just going to jump on it real quick because it's a strange thing. we're doing HD, we're bringing in contemporary features to this engine, but in doing so, it does sometimes destroy. So, Theory, you were talking previously about you love the jank.
Mhm.
Zabak, for example, if rechanneling a bit of that jank is getting that kind of old that old croc kind of model in there and just kind of scaling it up and taking it a little bit more seriously. That we're bringing in the jank very intentionally. The engine guys will reverse engineer that jank. We had a modern in who would be great if you ever get a chance to speak to him, for him to go into the technical side of these things. But to anyone that's interested, we had to redo the Z sorter and the way that the depth buffer works in the game. Basically, it now renders to a higher floating point precision, which means when your character and camera moves, your character vertices don't jitter around as much. They kind of stay a lot more solid. And me and him had a whole chat about it. We sat down for almost like an hour and a half just talking just about that. And they're well within their ability to recreate that, and in many instances they have. And where budget and production allows, we will go back and preserve that with a contemporary programming technique, or even just kind of converting it into a C++ or whatever we need to do. So yeah, the efforts being made to preserve some of the weird features of this is ridiculous. No one's asking for it, but the passion is there.
It's awesome you bring this up. And the reason I say that is because I just yesterday had a really long conversation with Husky, with Mod Husky,
Oh,
who
hell
he
yeah.
yeah, he and I he- the walls that we send to each other, it defies comprehension. Because he obviously big into game design and all that kind of stuff, and I am too. So whenever I upload a video that he watches, and he sends me all these really interesting and unique insights into it, sometimes disagreeing, sometimes agreeing, but always very polite. And
Mhm.
something I asked him, and he didn't know the answer to this. Obviously, he's not on the art space as much, but he told me to ask you, or maybe someone that might know the answer to this, is actually in regard to some of the elements that are being lost with HD. One of those, and I don't see it enough personally, just because I can't utilize the not. So pulling back for a second, as I mentioned, I love that like old school PS1, Dreamcast era jittery, like, weirdly aliased kind of aesthetic. And as much as I'm excited for HD, like HD Clan, I think it's actually really cool and it still looks like old school, which I love. Um, the one thing that I'm almost like, there's a little pain there, is I have to play on the GPU version of the game just for recording purposes, but I much rather play on the no HD 117, no GPU plugin at all, just the baseline aesthetic of the game, the one that is very aliased, very harshly aliased and jittery and all that kind of stuff. To me, looks like how I envision old school when I think about it, and that's honestly how I wish the trailers looked. That's how I wish all of the game looked. And seeing the HD stuff, I'm like, this looks great, but I am nervous or sad that the SD version of the game might not be able to bring over that like really aliased and harshly aliased version of the game that's like super jittery and super like, inconsistent in its anytime you move the camera, and I was going to
Mhm.
ask you, like, obviously you mentioned that there's a level of like consideration there, but obviously recreating that, specifically what I'm referring to, is so difficult, especially considering I can't even describe what I really mean or use the correct language for it. I sent Mod Husky 2 pictures to give him an example because I'm like, I don't know how to explain what I'm referring to here.
Mhm. It's the answer to it technically is so much more. This sounds ridiculous. It sounds really kind of hyperbolic, really, but the answer to that is so much more incredible when I discovered it. Typically, so the core architecture of this game was made by the Tsugawa brothers. When they were really young, and they basically built this MMO that can run in the browser. And to do that, they optimized the data structure of old school in some genius ways. And as a consequence of that, your vertices do not smoothly interpolate across the screen. They jump between memory gaps. It's like an integer step instead of a float step. It basically the data is it's extremely curated. Like we only have so many colors because the color spectrum in the game has been compressed to save like maybe a kilobyte. I don't know, maybe even less than that. So all of those artifacts are not they're not haha old school sucks. They're, oh my god, that's a genius data optimization that has allowed this game to be served to millions of people. on really retrograde hardware. So there's an engineering miracle in there that has had heavy art consequences and has spawned an art style. So for SD, there has been a certain kind of emphasis to kind of preserve as much of that is possible. Though I will be completely honest, the super gritty, the real hardcore truth of it, the old school look, frankly, it's quite hard to keep hold of that in its most purity, mostly because it becomes a development cost in its own right. And of course, making a video game like Oldschool Runescape, you're having to please so many different types of people that have so many different types of expectation. The budget has to then be portioned to each of their wills. And quite frankly, the argument you're making, which is exactly my stance too, theory, I love and wish to preserve exactly the original incarnation of old school's graphical representation. That task, I believe, firmly will be in the domain of the hardcore modders to really preserve the kind of quantized, totally broken, GRUD shaded, non-Z buffer, like the way the visual sorting is done. It's just like a clever sorting hat trick.
I
It's amazing programming.
I love the idea that with the HD client, we're gonna go from the plugin, developers, the modders, are gonna go from making the game look better to making it look worse, in response. But I totally support that. If there, for whatever reason, there's a plugin developer listening to this who has like a big, investment in retaining that, yeah, I would love that, because quite frankly, most people don't care. And realistically, the old school art style translates the existence of aliasing. Obviously, it 100% does. You look at the game with the GPU plugin, and you're not like, what am I looking at? Fucking Final Fantasy 14? No, like you are aware of what you're looking at. It very
Mm.
much translates and it works, and it still looks great. But yeah, I am very fond of that. There was a time where I think for like a month during a little bit before and a little bit during the Yama release, where I was playing only with like that really with no GPU, no HD117 plugin, just that bare bones
Mm.
kind of vibe. And I was so into it. I loved the look. And then I realized that all of my recordings, for some reason, offset my mouse. So when you look at my mouse in the recording, it looks like it's like, like 4 or 5 inches away from where it actually is, and I could not figure that out. So I'm like, well, got to return to GPU now, which is
Ah,
fine, but I was upset. But when it comes to like the trailers and stuff for the game, I always wish that's what they look like, especially. And man, is this gonna be? No, it's fine to say. I had like a couple conversations with some of the community managers for the game who are working on like different parts of branding and stuff. And I always was like reiterating to them, or I'm like, the PS1 era, Dreamcast era vibe, that is more popular today than it's ever been. You look at like every indie game, the developers who make these games today are people that grew up on the games they're replicating in the indie scene. They're no longer they didn't grow up on Super Mario, they didn't grow up on Mario 2. The 16-bit, 8-bit retro stuff now is the early 3D stuff. That's just the era we're in today. That's so popular. Don't be afraid. Don't feel the need to, wash over that for some palatability. The hyper aliased blender stuff. Don't feel like that's what's going to translate. People are going to resonate with the current indie aesthetic because it's clearly appealing to someone. You look at a lot of the indie games out today, from the boomer shooters who copy this aesthetic to wow, I'm forgetting its name now. The Kingsfield-esque games that do so as well. There's clearly a huge passion for retaining that level of quote unquote jank.
yeah, for sure. I think the whole games industry is going through a revolution where we have games like Red Dead, Cyberpunk, incredible games that, visually, now we have ray tracing, especially. The games, selling the visual fidelity of games has kind of reached its peak, to be honest. And I think there's a resurgence happening right now if we're looking back and we're asking, what does make a good game? And typically, I mean, Dwarf Fortress proves that you just need the bare minimal graphical interface. We're quite willing to project meaning and value onto quite near anything. I think personally, old school hits like almost a perfect sweet spot where there's enough
Yeah.
differentiation of shape and color and design that you can say a lot, do a lot, set enough of a scene. but it doesn't blow up the budget. We can have a pretty small art team, to be honest, and we can put out quite a lot. Yeah, it's I find it quite a nice sweet spot, and definitely in my own out of work hours, whenever I get the time, my own indie work, I'm always looking at similar sorts of low poly art styles, or very
For sure.
um,
And I think that like retroactive appreciation for something is it applies to even more than the art. Something I actually spoke to Husky about. So I'm sure he's gonna be watching this because I'm gonna send it to him after. But so sorry for mentioning this if this upsets you, but it's something that he and I talked about a little bit. Where it's like what about old school is appealing to people, right? Why is an what does it mean to be an old school MMO, right? What does that look like?
mm,
And my perspective here, I'll just talk about mine, is I don't want to put words in his mouth. So my perspective is just that it's there's a level of like filing down the friction and edges of a game to the point where it stops having people connect to it. Something I say in some of my earlier videos is that, friction is really healthy for game design, right? But if you have too much friction, you can't move, you're stuck. But if you have too little friction, you don't ever connect. You don't stick. So you need some of it. And for a lot of players, I feel modern MMOs have filed down too much friction. They've washed it too far into this smooth, like marble,
mm,
to the point where people are having difficulty connecting to the game. The games don't demand enough from them. Old school RuneScape looks back, and classic World of Warcraft looked back and realized, and people that played it and the millions that played it realized that, like, hey, there is a value there of that friction. Not all of it, but a lot of that friction has so much value to the genre. And in filing it down, you've lost that. So that applies to the
mm,
art to me as much as it does the game design.
mhm. Yeah, I totally I resonate with that. I'd love to hear Husky's answer to this. I'll have to ask him. Um, can I also offer another?
Mhm.
Can I throw another
Yeah, please.
appraisal of what makes old school RuneScape attractive to people? And this is a bit more of a highbrow one, and potentially isn't very satisfying. But for me personally, I feel like this touches on, if anything, this is an effort to describe really what that nostalgia is. Um, so there is encoded within Old School RuneScape as an activity. If you really get into it and level and set goals and achieve them and start to chain behaviors and do this so you can do that and then this, that, and the other, and then you achieve something after a week or two of grinding, and then there's this typical type of revelation and pattern of behavior that Old School embodies, and I feel like it has some virtues built within it, and those virtues are expressed uniformly through every aspect. So the audio design, the visual design, the game design, even the programming to a certain degree, and definitely the narrative. And I'll list them. It's discipline, hard work, and persistence pay off. So just that as a statement. Discipline, hard work, and persistence pay off. That is extremely core to the value set of Old School RuneScape, which other MMOs do exhibit it. I, worked pretty hard on World of Warcraft back in the day when I played it, especially hardcore. I think that would be a hard time. So I know what hard work is, but the hard work in old school is so particular. Everyone's probably grinding the gem crab right now. I've seen people grinding multiple 99 combat levels out of just the gem crab, and they're there for like weeks back to back, just doing it. It's a ridiculous discipline. Old school does that. Second, don't take yourself too seriously. So from the quest design to the aesthetic and the way that your game just presents itself, it's just saying, do all these things, but don't take yourself too seriously. You're not really the hero. You're just another. You just be yourself. Just be you. It's very grounded. Very actually, strangely enough, a very kind of British attitude that I think that there are cultural inheritances in old school RuneScape that summarize almost like an 80s and 90s uh, child growing up in Britain. I can get into that another time. It's about semiotics, but and then the third and final piece is it doesn't have to be flashy to mean something. So your achievement, you recognize that it feels good because of the work you put into it. Old School RuneScape exemplifies that massively. It's not until you get to really the end game and you're getting stuff like Torva, Oathblade, etc., that the game's gonna start to visually say, "Oh, look at you," because genuinely you've done something amazing. Come on, it's time to celebrate. But for the most part, you're kind of a dude in the most basic robes with one color. Things are pretty simple. So it's not too flashy, but it means something to you.
Yeah,
That's a long answer theory, but
no, no, no. I love the answer, and I agree. I think that something I say about skill in games in MMOs are able to inhabit a different skill set. When people say, "Oh, you're good at this game. You have a lot of skill in this game." I think what they generally mean is game knowledge and like reaction, right? Being really good at Counter-Strike is being precise, aiming very well, having good map awareness and knowledge, good strategy in that regard, but it's very like reactive. In old school RuneScape and in older MMOs, I would say more so than newer ones, there is a different level of skill and a different level of virtue. I think that's a word you actually used. Um, and that's patience, right? Patience is a virtue. And patience is also a skill set. To be patient is a very, very positive trait. And I think that RuneScape or old school RuneScape too fosters a level of patience and reward for that patience that other games really don't as much anymore for many reasons. And we can get into those. But the seasonality of modern MMOs really doesn't lend itself at all to any level of patience because you are not only aware that it's seasonal, that it's going to be removed and you're going to start again, but two, it's flitting. It's 6 months at most. So that's not really something that a lot of people are connecting with too much either. It appeals to a different kind of market. Old school RuneScape really taps into something a bit deeper from like an MMO standpoint, which I appreciate.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree, and I think a lot of people are kind of burnt out on very shallow kind of game design gimmicks we see in contemporary MMO spaces. Not always. I think that's pretty unfair. There's still innovation going on in the MMO space, but um, I think there's a depth and a grittiness to the old school experience, and the RS3 experience too. And I'd be curious to see where Dragon mods are going to find their identity here as well as part of the RuneScape
Yeah,
broader IP. If they're going to spiritually take that and bring that into Dragon mods, I hope so. I think that'd be quite interesting. So yeah, there's a virtue there for sure that's unique here, and I think people have never really forgot it, but it's starting to kind of gain traction again.
for sure. And I want to zoom in just to some specifics from an art standpoint here. First one is going to be a little bit of an unserious question, but I'm still interested in it because it's something that I was thinking about ever since I did Desert Treasure 2. And for those who aren't aware, Mod Grub was the concept artist behind quite a few areas of Desert Treasure 2. And for those who also aren't aware, Desert Treasure 2 is like my favorite quest of any MMO. I'm going to make a whole video about it at some point, I think. It's incredible. The quest is unbelievable. And from the storytelling perspective, as someone who's usually not someone who like scours the lore in games, I was really invested in the Majorat story and what the way it was told in Desert Treasure 2. And some of my favorite areas are in that game too. The Lasar Undercity is a great example of like an area that really resonated with me. I love the puzzle there. I love the boss there. I love the aesthetics there. And I want to talk about inspirations for that area for a moment because the immediate, like just immediate connection I drew from the Lasar Undercity or to the Lasar Undercity was and feel free to correct me if this is not the case, is a new Londo from Dark Souls 1. Was that a point of inspiration for you when creating Lasar?
Uh, I'm gonna be honest, no, it wasn't.
Wow.
So potentially, Wes and I work together very closely on Lasara the City. Potentially, he's actually I've never played Dark Souls. Potentially, he has, and that might have been in
I'll have
his
to ask
mind.
him. I'll have to ask him because I am like so like it obviously it's a half sunken city. That's not like
Mhm,
the most you're not like it's not a trailblazing concept there. It's a trope in
mhm,
fantasy games, but the way it was rendered is incredible. I love the Zerosian like twist on just about every single asset there had like this Zerosian element. Like I even love the way that like everything had this turquoise tint to it, to be very specific, because that speaks to the color purple being degraded by ocean water. That's so cool. I love that like
mhm.
entire vibe is so you know fulfilling to look at. And that like faint like magic aura that radiates there, the floating statue that's being clung
Mm.
together by this like vine. Very, very cool. Love it. So, and the reason I bring up New Londo, if for you who haven't hasn't played Dark Souls 1, is that it's tell me if it reminds you of anything. It's a city that's half sunken in the water, populated by ghosts of a bygone era. There is, But regardless, I just wanted to ask that. I also loved, I believe you also, yeah, the Stranglewood. You worked on the Stranglewood. That's an area that
Yes.
I love the color scheme. I'm happy that we got to see more of it with like the Auburn Vale and recent Volamore stuff because I love the color scheme
Mhm.
used. They're very unique to the game. Love the concept. I was almost like, I loved the area, but I was disappointed it wasn't used for more gameplay wise, just like a boss and an area for the quest. I was hoping for more
Mhm.
Slayer creatures there and just like maybe a skilling thing there because I thought it was such a creative concept. Can you walk me through like designing those, like what you're thinking about, what inspired you
Mhm.
maybe if it wasn't Dark Souls 1?
Yeah, sure. So also I'll give a big shout out to Modja. She designed the bosses
Yeah, they're
for
incredible.
DT2 along with me, and she did a really amazing job. So for principally my focus was mostly on the Majorat rework and the environment design for many of the places. So for Lasar Undercity, it's a really there's so much dense history Modeb was taking me through laid in this place that the so it was a Rosian fortress during the end of the Gold Wars. I'm probably going to ruin this lore. There's even a meme about me being terrible with lore. It's only partially true. I actually do. I'm very passionate about the lore, and typically I'm okay. But when I have to recite it, I'll mess it up. So and this was a long time ago as well. It was a Zerosian city. It was full of all sorts of demons, and it was the whole thing going on there. However, it has now been kind of corrupted by an additional layer and a kind of a new deity that Modded is kind of teasing in the game here and there as that
Yeah.
attack.
Yeah.
So there's a whole extra level of kind of like Zerosian is already pretty evil. It's already kind of archetypally kind of questionable. So now the challenge in Lasar Undercity was how do you haunt something that's already quite haunting? And that was basically what resulted in Lasar. You've got the strange hands grasping the floating pyramid, the kind of strange you go down the sewer and there's the ritual site and all the bodies are arranged around it. But otherwise you don't really see any corpses anywhere. There's kind of mystery sewn into all of it. And it's an attempt to kind of make Zaros haunted in a sense, which is already quite difficult. But I'm really glad it landed. It's another area where I hope we can revisit at some point and add more to it because it's a really cool place. And yeah, and the Whisperer is a great fight. But it does feel like more can be potentially done there. I don't know if we have a story that justifies it. And then Stranglewood has a whole kind of again a lot of really interesting lore about the kind of the ancient ones. I wonder if I'm just on the wiki now. The concept never made it live, so I guess that's some hidden lore that I'll reveal at another time. I'm not sure. Hopefully, I'm not spoiling too much for Ed. But yeah, it's this idea that this place had just kind of been sucked dry by this kind of parasite that originally was a weapon of defense from the ancient ones that they kind of lost control of, and this thing has kind of gone out and it's just leached. It leaches the life out of things, and in the case of the Stranglewood, it's totally gone out of control. So it was a really fun opportunity to lean into old school RuneScape's strengths, which is you have just pure color and shape. You don't have any in HD. This would change, but for the SD approach, the art style we really love theory, you just have color. So it was this whole idea of playing with the parasite being a strong red, everything being super bleached and white to represent obviously that they're having the life sucked out of them. And then just to get a bit of the eeriness, one of our influences was the film Annihilation. I don't
Oh
know if
yeah,
you've seen this
big
film.
time.
Yeah, so Annihilation was kind of into it as well, and they had. I thought one of the amazing things about the film Annihilation was that they would show you the most grotesque thing ever, like that dude that was kind of splayed all over the wall, and
Mm.
his entrails are kind of turning into this beautiful fungal array. Like they managed to make something so hideous and gross, almost simultaneously kind of beautiful. So that was the kind of desire with Strangled was to um, kind of to freak you out, to kind of really make you uncomfortable, but at the same time, kind of still be enticing, not to be just like generically freaky, but kind of to add a level of intrigue to it and a level of kind of beauty,
And
and
that
to
and that
attempt that just through the palette.
and that's something that we I can touch on for a moment is like that's the kind of evolution that I'm seeing, right? Is a lot of old school RuneScape and just a lot of the traditional RuneScape world is this really like classical British fantasy, and there's so much charm and passion there that people have really connected with over the years, and it shouldn't change, right? Like we love that. We love, just that Varrock is just a city, like it's just this little city that
Mm,
you go to. It's not like it's not something that's this towering, like totally unique, bespoke, like you know, fantastical creation with like magical spires or what. It's just a fucking city with some banks in it, you know, and the Grand Exchange. And
Yeah.
that's a level of grounded British fantasy that it's really wonderful. And because people have connected so much with that, I think it would be very easy to just continue that, you know, continue recreating, oh, it's a dragon slayer quest, you slay some dragons. But the point of evolution here that I'm noticing is now that you have that, it's so much more fun to juxtapose that traditional
Yeah.
stuff with something a little bit more out there. Because yeah, the Stranglewood and the Auburn Vale as well that connects to it is very creative. It is an aesthetic that has never before been done in old school, and it's a pretty unique color scheme for the fantasy landscape as well. Super unique. And it's fun you bring up like some of the background for it because you know in my free time during long showers, I always like thinking about you know what I would do with the game if I ever had the opportunity, and I always had this idea for you know an entity that exists under the giant like spire, the pyramid of it. That's kind of like the heart of it all, you know, that's like
Mm.
that's bleeding the environment dry. So if I see a giant heart-like monster that we fight at some point, I'm definitely gonna, you know, accuse of plagiarism. but but yeah, no, that's awesome. And to bounce to Losar for a moment, very same situation there, right? You take this concept of this washed away underground or underwater, half underwater city, and you add that RuneScape lore to it, that Zerosian lore to it, that makes it a bit more evocative, a bit more reminiscent of what you're seeing in old school. I mean, in RuneScape in general. And the same applies to the Majora, which is a good segue because you redesigned a lot of them, you designed a lot of them, and I love their designs. Very distinct, very unique to the areas they come from. And I want to speak about for a moment, and because this is going to connect us to a future topic for sure, is I want to speak about Sliske because much like Zhao
Mm.
Tak in Desert Treasure 2, Sliske is another character that for the people that have played RuneScape 3, they're aware of them, right? Like that's a character that has ran the gamut, the storyline gamut in RuneScape 3, and now has made his grand debut in Old School. But he's quite different in Old School, visually and maybe even from a character perspective, although not as much in that regard. Can you talk me through designing Sliske or even redesigning Sliske to fit Old School?
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, let me remind myself. I'm just going through my old sketches because
Mhm.
he went through a lot of variations. I don't know how you're going to format this, but on the wiki, if you go on Sliske's page, at the very bottom you will see some various kind of phases he went through where Mod Ed and I were kind of bouncing back and forth. Um, so I also need to get up the RS3 Sliske. You'll have to forgive me. Maybe you want to cut me just
No, 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 no.
typing this out. But
It's all good.
um, I want to make sure I'm speaking clearly about this because RS3 Sliske had a particular incarnation that just would have been very difficult to backport. Here we go. I got it up now. So mostly it was about shape density. So if you look at basically all of the Majorat suffered from this equally. But if you strip them down to their very base shapes, you end up with an extremely complex skull, and you also end up without the textures and the context to back it all up, very ambiguous clothing choices. So they simply just wouldn't survive the backport. However, that's fine because we decided we were going to remaster them. So what was imperative was to set up a really strong shape language for all of the Majorat right off the bat, and that quite honestly for old school RuneScape, it's such a as we were just literally just talking about, it's such a cut and dry, honest serving of fantasy that to try to take it further and add anything to it would be kind of be putting legs on a snake. It's okay. It's okay that the Majorats are skeletons. That's fine, and they have the little gems on their head, and that's just a triangle. That's totally fine. So then it was just to start there and first be comfortable with that, and then by the personality of each Majorat, kind of clothe them basically, but with the recognition that in old school RuneScape, full wizard's robe is one solid color. You have three shapes and one solid color. That's your bandwidth to design something. And Akra has a robe. She has three colors. She has a dark, a mid, and a light. So already I'm betraying old school by kind of reducing these Majorats down to this extremely simple style in comparison to the RS3 incarnation. So when it came to Sliske, he's probably the most, so I'd say between Khazad, Jalan, oh man, Hazil, they're all so iconic, to be honest. It's hard to really say that Sliske is in some way unique, but he is in the sense that he's holding the cage out in front of him. So that's representing he's kind of a master of traps. He's a master of intrigue. He's a master of manipulation. So here you have the bird cage symbolizing that, and he willfully hangs that in front of them. But then behind him, he has a red dagger. So it's a really simple iconography, and it represented in his posing and his attire. But it says everything about his personality, and that kind of encapsulates essentially what the mission was with each one of these Majorat redesigns. It was to encapsulate make their clothing actually really say something about who they are as people, or who they are as Majorats.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll talk about RuneScape 3 and art in a moment, I'm sure. But to touch on like the old school incarnations, I love the old school Majorat. I think I prefer what you guys have done here over the RuneScape 3 incarnations, and that's for a couple reasons we can touch on. And again, I'm speaking only personally here, but the yeah, the designs here are really great. You can kind of you tell their allegiance by just looking at them, which is really cool. Because for those who aren't aware, I'm not like the most knowledgeable about lore. I would love to have Mod Ed at some point, come here and educate me. But I am a little bit aware of the Majorat storyline because I got so interested in it after DT2, and there's two allegiances, right? There's one to Zeros and one to Zamorak, and the color
Mhm.
coding there, the purple and the red, are what spell out those allegiances. And there's a couple of Majorat that dance between, and they often have a bit of a mixture of the two, I would say. The Sliske design, especially, is like so old school fantasy, right? It's the most like unsubtle design in the best possible way, where I adore the Sasuke design, where it's just, yeah, as you said, there's the cage in front of him, he's gonna trap you, he has a dagger behind his back. It's so like meticulously posed, that like he's a trickster, that he's gonna stab you in the back with the dagger he's holding behind his back as a core part of his model, is like such like a awesome immediate visual. I was just immediately interested in the character and into the way he was presented. And shout out to the sound design team, the music team, and
Mhm.
the animation team for also bringing that entire segment to life. That big reveal in DT2 was just awesome.
Yes.
Very very like, in some ways, very traditionally RuneScape, but also not. Like, that was a very unique cutscene for old school. I don't know if there's ever been a cutscene in old school that was so meticulously curated with the sound design, the ticking clock. I don't know if you remember
Yeah,
that. It was very unique.
yeah, yeah. Ed he broke that down, how he achieved that recently, how he did that kind of tempo with the ticking. I'm not gonna butcher it, but definitely, yeah. If you can ever get him on, yeah, I'm sure that'd be an interesting
I'm
conversation.
not sure if he's in the creative Discord or not, but if you have any ability to reach him, I would love to speak to him a little bit and get him on for sure. I love his work, and I love that passion he has for the game. So it'd be awesome to talk about the story a little bit more as well. Something that I think is very overlooked with RuneScape. I imagine his job is at once incredibly fulfilling and a little bit annoying too, because so many people make jokes about like spacebar and quests and all that kind of stuff. When of all games, of all MMOs, like RuneScape is one of the few that properly gives you an RPG story. Like, not a linear
Yeah.
one, like you would see in like a Final Fantasy game, which that has its own merits, but like a true RPG story where you're just kind of bouncing between a dozen to 2 dozen different narratives simultaneously. That has been completely lost in the modern climate, in my opinion. So like, I whether you spacebar or not, you kind of have to give the flowers where it's due. That's the most old school thing you could do, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, no fetch quests. It's all every quest you do is just chock a block full of lore and things going on. It's incredible. Ed and all the developers really, all of the quest developers, the amount of knowledge that man, Modash, everyone. It's a crazy amount of skill sets, and there are some people. Sometimes we'll book a cabin somewhere and just go barbecue and kayak about and just talk about it all and just take a break. And we joke because we say, "There's a car crash on the way here, and we're all wiped out. It's over." There's so much. niche knowledge in so many heads, and Ed is definitely one of those individuals. I mean, but truly, almost every mod I work with, everyone's got like a special thing they're holding on to that they bring to it, and the narrative, especially for old school, because that's what I've been most intimately involved with for the last 5 years. Um, but I mean, this it's an interesting point actually in terms of narrative, because it's one of the another one of the key divergences between RS3 and old school. That is that RS3 is going down an extremely high fantasy, explicitly, very kind of gods and high power, and they took it down that road. And then old school deliberately kind of has a hush hush approach to the gods, and is very kind of low key about all that. That all comes down to, as far as I'm aware, maybe I could be wrong here, but my understanding is that's really coming from Ed. And I think
Yeah,
it's a tasteful, just choice.
I completely agree. And I think that even from what I know, from what I've heard, I guess behind the grapevine, is well, RuneScape 3 is also dialing that back a little bit as well recently in like a response to just how extreme that has gotten over the years for them. I think that something I learned from the RS guy stream I was watching the other day was that people are no longer the what is it called? The world guardian. That's not a thing anymore. I guess
Oh, really?
yeah, apparently not.
Did not
Apparently
know
that
that.
apparently the characters lost that in their fight with the god Zamorak. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, I didn't know that. So I'm like, okay, yeah, like they're clearly like, and I think that's a general kind of overarching response to people's enjoyment of MMOs. MMOs are always going to appeal to an older crowd, to a more old school crowd, and that involves people that have a level of intrigue or passion for not being the world savior, just being kind of an intrepid adventurer that chooses
Mm,
their own kind of path and choices to the best of their abilities. Obviously, in a MMO, that's especially difficult. But yeah, I love that choice. Love it, keeping it a bit more grounded, and that's what really makes the more high fantasy moments really stand out. As I mentioned, with like the Varrock to what's it, Lassar Undercity, the Stranglewood. That's a juxtaposition that would not be as evocative if Varrock was the floating spires, like
yeah,
magical,
yeah.
kind of vibe. Very, very cool. I also want to quickly just shout out one more time, like outside of the reveal of the DT2 stuff, another moment that really like spoke to me as a newfound quest enjoyer when I was playing old school RuneScape for the first time was Dragon Slayer 2. The moment, oh man, this is like such an incredible moment where you kind of like get all the battlements ready. I don't know how much you remember that quest, but you get all the battlements ready, you recruit everyone to go like, prevent the invasion, the siege of the dragons, and you sail out into the ocean and you get like sieged or whatever, very similar to Dragon Slayer 1. And then you like spawn in and the boats are all destroyed and you're hopping between the boats or whatever.
Mhm.
Agility failures notwithstanding, the main RuneScape theme starts playing, and like I swear to God, not a single moment in the game has made me as emotional as that moment where I'm just like, I don't even have nostalgia toward this game, and it's making me emotional because it's such like a such a
Mhm.
quintessential old school fantasy moment. Like you are hopping between burning boats, doing a sequel to the most well-known quest in the entire game, and the main theme of the game is playing. That is whoever made that
Mhm.
choice, whether they're working on the game or not, that is such like a applause-worthy decision in my opinion.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
It's
Um,
I think it's totally underrated, like old school NRS3's ability to provide like cinematic moments. They're totally there.
and they do it all like while keeping your character grounded. So many games kind of take
Mhm.
control out of your character during the cinematic moments, but I love how a lot of the most cinematic moments are still delivered through a chat box. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, to segue to the next topic I want to quickly address is well, probably not quickly honestly, but to address is actually your role in both games, because you do have experience working in RuneScape 3, you have experience working in old school, and there's a level of insight I feel like that comes with that. I think a lot of old school players either have a older memory of RuneScape 3 that's not positive, or don't have any memory of RuneScape 3 at all. So I would love to hear, just first of all, just like what you've done on RuneScape 3. And I know you kind of hinted at something, you're being a bit critical of your work. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about that before we get into some of the details.
Sure. Okay, I will preface it was a very long time ago.
Mhm.
Very, very long time ago now. So my memory of explicitly all the things I worked on for RuneScape 3 a little bit hazy. But I will say that when I first kind of joined Jagex, my first job was on the NTX department. So I was designing a lot of those NTX armor kits, and
Wow. You hear
I
that,
I
everybody?
had
No, I'm joking.
yeah, it's I kind of started in the pits, and I recognized that instantly my contributions were in some way. To this day, I have a very strong view against even cosmetic rewards in games. From a business perspective, I completely understand it. It's very hard to argue the benefit of visual cosmetics in stores. However, there is a visual integrity that is really important to preserve, and that is if you're walking around in Torva or Oathblade or whatever you've got, that is a visual representation of your achievement. And if someone can walk by you in something that looks 10 times as flashy as Oathblade, and you knew they bought it in the shop, it's a fundamental bummer. And so in that respect, when I look back at my contributions to RuneScape 3, my early contributions, I wasn't on MTX forever, thankfully. They put me on the Quest teams a little bit later. Um, I look at that side and I for the most part feel I kind of just sigh. I just think, "Oh, okay." I don't think the work I did was too bad, but it certainly wasn't it wasn't the type of contribution I wanted to be making, to Jagex. But it was during my tenure back then that kind of Jagex did move me onto the Quest team, and I got a chance to actually involve myself in more of the quest line stuff, and that was brilliant. I had a really, really great time, and actually what to bring it in full circle, since we've started Blood Moon Rises, I'm actually reworking a lot of the stuff I actually did. Original concepts I'll be taking work. I'll be getting tickets come through that have my old concepts on from when I was, how old was I? 20, 23 years old. I'm 31 now for context. So, and like just last week, I was redesigning, an old design. So it's over the years, it's kind of become a privilege, and it's given me a unique perspective on the whole IP from an art perspective. I can see
Yeah.
it in many different angles.
And before I even get into that, I want to say, like, I'm sure that, most people who are, I guess, older than like 13 and also more mature can recognize that it's not the developer's fault what they're put on doing. They're just doing their job. When it comes to how you feel about MTX, I'm very passionate about, my general distaste towards that kind of stuff. And but at no point should that ever manifest as any kind of like hatred toward a developer, because, again, they're doing their job. You kind of have to work, if you want to survive, and hopefully you get a job doing something you're passionate about. And for artists, that's a privilege, right? But apart from that, it's really interesting. A couple of things about RuneScape 3 are very interesting to me, especially now that I've invested a lot of time playing it for leagues and thinking about it more critically. It's been really, really fascinating. So the first thing is just your contributions. I Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure you played a role in designing Sarah, and I see that on the RS3
Mm,
wiki that you had some concept arts for her.
mhm.
Cool. Yeah, like stuff like that's it's very cool because I think she has a great design. So I was really happy about that, to see that. And when it comes to like reworking stuff for Blood Moon Rises, I believe your tenure at RuneScape 3's, content creation scene was around the time they were doing a lot of the vampire stuff. So, or ending
Mhm.
some of the vampire stuff. So it would make sense that you were also, maybe consciously brought into the old school's version of that and adapting it, and seeing how you can, translate some of those choices to the old school thing. Obviously, no spoilers of what you're doing, but
Be
that's
very
very
careful
exciting to
not to
see.
spoil.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure, and I'm very interested to see, because the vampire stuff, for as much as I love the Majorat as like my favorite narrative through line with RuneScape, the vampire stuff is a very close second. I know my group Iron Man partner. Shout out. His favorite storyline in the game is the vampire one. So he's very, very
Mhm.
excited for the culmination of that. And I'm very excited to see a different way to get blood shards, which will definitely happen, for sure. But I'm very excited to see that too. So very excited to hear it. So when it comes to like the RuneScape 3 art style, so we talk about how old school RuneScape has like two, I'm not going to say competing, because in some ways they're very synergetic, art styles
Mm.
that have been pushed forward with time. Sorry, if you can hear that car. The RuneScape 3 is a bit different. I think I've called it like a quilt, like a patchworked together quilt of like
Mm.
20 years of different art styles.
Yeah.
Um, that they are slowly mulling through and adapting to something a bit more cohesive, but it's very jarring in some ways how different the game looks. And I kind of want to get your thoughts on that beyond the more obvious, like, well, yeah, they should fix that or whatever, because it is very interesting, all the different styles. You mentioned how there was a level of inspiration from WoW and their art style team. Like RuneScape, they had the HD update. I'm sorry, I'm yapping a lot here, but they had the HD update in 2008. In 2010, they reworked, or 2011, they reworked the characters, but they still had that shaded
Mhm.
polygon aesthetic. Then in like 2013, they were reworking the engine. In 2014, they started implementing like texturing on more simple polygonal shapes, which to me, those are my least favorite. I really don't like the way those look in RuneScape 3. And that was like from 2014 to 20 like 16 or 17. And then in 2017 plus, they kind of started adapting a more like more of that cartoony aesthetic, I guess you could say, which I actually like a lot
Mhm.
more. Something that's a bit more evocative of WoW, in my opinion. The thing that they really started leaning heavier into today. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you have any like considerations for that? Maybe some insight on that?
I um, so obviously I don't work on RS3, though I'm very close to the concert team, because obviously I used to work with many of them, and we make an effort to keep a close relationship between the two IPs, just so we're kind of on the same channel. So I have an enormous amount of respect for the artists on RS3, and also have enormous amount of respect for the enormity of the challenge they have on their hands when it comes to unifying the art style of RS3. It was already an immensely difficult challenge when I worked on it, and now there's been X amount more years, more art directors have come through, different initiatives, the corporate structure of Jagex itself, and its goals and ideals have changed. It's very much a ship of Theseus situation
Yeah,
where you have, an immensely complex product. Um, and I think what we're going to see over the next 5-10 years for RuneScape 3 is the same, and they're well on their way through this process already, but it's the same humbling old school had to take. Um, Being the underdog for so long and just plugging away at basically what many people in the games industry, if they had careers, would consider suicide to work on. I know that sounds like a heavy thing to say, but certainly when I looked at old school and was contemplating reapplying, it would certainly be a patch on my CV that it would be very curious to be explaining to, say, a AAA company or a film company exactly why I have skills to work on that level of fidelity after, say, a decade of old school RuneScape. I don't think that's the case anymore, but certainly the old school was a pariah and it had to go through a period of really being humble. And RS3 is going through that and has gone through that. And they're at a current stage where they have become so galvanized and so they're on it now. They know exactly what it is and what it needs to be, and they're making extremely bold experiments in getting there. So I think we're going to see a huge resurgence for RS3, and they're going to find that identity. And I think they already have the seeds and crumbs of that identity coming together in a very strong way. Um,
definitely. In my very long video I just published yesterday about the game, that's kind of been a core takeaway for me, right? I think that there is something really amazing, in there that is amazing in both similar ways that old school is, but also entirely different ways that give it its own place to exist beside old school as a different experience that still harkens back to a kind of appeal of an MMO that is very unique. Like when I think what's a game like old school RuneScape, there's only one, and it's called RuneScape 3. Like that's the problem.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so there is something there, and it's really worth cherishing and saving and chiseling out. Because right now it's so suffocated by a lot of time, and I say bloat of systems of different releases and pieces of content that might have not worked or jived as well with, as you said, modern initiatives. That to me, it needs to take a more stripped back approach to it. Instead of just adding on like old school RuneScape can do now that it's like really well established, instead of adding on, they need to strip back and then add onto the more like, palatable, thing they found within that stripping back. Because that's always a big concern when you have like 30 mini games that no one plays, or 18 different time gated systems that are kind of frustrating to start a new character and navigate. And most people that play the game now have already reached an end game point where they don't need to navigate those things. So they're not giving the feedback necessary to the developers to say, hey, this is a problem, because there's not enough new players coming in to give that feedback. So something that I've always been, or not always, but as of yesterday when I uploaded the video, have been very forthright about, is that like, take that initiative and start that pruning now, so you're not relying on new players to come in and leave immediately just to give you that feedback that you're already going to get. Because there's something really wonderful there. And that's a roundabout way to say about when it comes to the art, where I love the new art style that they kind of found, I think, or maybe around
Me too.
2019, 2020. It's really beautiful. Like,
Mhm.
shout out the archaeology dig sites that you uncover as you progress through them. Just genuinely incredible areas, not just for
Mhm.
RuneScape, just in general. Like there's this Saradomin Everlight dig site area with this giant, spire that has like a fire coming out of it, and it's tinted blue and is the sunken ruin. It is like one of the coolest areas I've seen in a game this year. Same applies to the Armadillo dig site, where you fly up and you build a wingsuit, you're flying around it. It's just so cool, very cool, and it still is RuneScape. It still kind of gives you that vibe. And they found something wonderful there. But this is why I bring that up. And I want to hear your thoughts on it if possible. For as much as I love the modern art style of RuneScape 3, I think it looks gorgeous. I feel like it's so difficult and unwieldy to create assets for, and it could down the line uh, become an issue where right now they're curating a less popular version of the game, but I feel like they need more development investment and time investment to create these assets as compared to old school RuneScape, which has a generally a shorter turnaround time, I would imagine. But maybe I'm totally wrong there.
It swings and roundabouts. Definitely the art style has more requirements. You have a lot more maps, data maps. We just have color and the shape of the polygon really, and it's ridiculously simple. That has its own challenges, but they're kind of more cognitive challenges than they are like brute force, get the work done challenges. RS3 does have a more involved art style. However, any artist worth their salt, and the artists on RuneScape 3 are worth their salt and some, can do that workflow pretty damn quick. They're pretty efficient, and they have a very modern tool set. They don't have any of the tech debt that old school struggles with. They don't place things on a grid. They can rotate it in any axes. Like the engine that they're working with is much more contemporary.
Okay, that's
So
great
they're
to know. That's good to know.
yeah, they still have the art style debt. They still got a whole bunch of assets that they got to update. They've got to bring everything up to the standard of the Everlight dig site, for example, and that's going to take time, and that's a tremendous amount of work that needs investment. But um, yes, it's a more expensive art style, but that team can take it. They could. They
Okay,
just need the time.
I'm glad to hear that, because I know, like, for example, if you're working in, like, say, the Unreal Engine 5, right? You have a lot of pre-baked assets you can use and adjust to your at your whim, that make it look like you just created the most complex, geometrically insane thing ever, but really you're just kind of remixing a pre-existing asset. I think that I want to say Expedition 33 did this really well, where they were saying how a lot of their uh, environmental assets were just remixed versions of something they have just baseline in Unreal 5 or the Unreal
Mhm.
Store. But they remixed them a little bit to make them their own, and they created like these. I forget the specific word they use, but they use something like the rock star assets, like the big thing people actually look at when they take in the environment, and those are bespoke, curated, and made meticulously by them. So, and that's a way they could foster a really high fidelity game while still, having 30 odd employees. RuneScape 3 is very interesting, and I'm glad that you bring that up, because that makes me a little bit less nervous about the future of what that might look like, with the content cadence that is demanded from MMOs. And I'm sure you're aware they're working currently on a new, like their first proper new continent, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I forget what it's called, but I'm very interested to see what they do with the new continent, just entirely built upon their newfound style. That could be very cool to see. And I want to also shout out like forget it, Mod Blackwitch, I believe, who's been at the forefront of
Yeah.
remixing a lot of existing areas and kind of bringing them up to snuff. I believe
Mhm.
she and maybe someone else I'm forgetting did the Relica region. The lighthouse area in that region looks insane. I don't know if you've seen it, the updated version,
I've
but
not
it is
haven't looked at.
like jaw-droppingly cool. Maybe I can quickly send you a picture so you can get a live non-video reaction here. One second.
I would love to do a Relica remaster for Old School.
Right. I feel like that's such a hard sell for old school fans, as
It
much as it
is
would be
it would
very
never
cool.
yeah, they'd never let me touch it, but I would, just add a few more, like, little bits of heraldry. Hey, nice. Oh, that's beautiful, very Giant's Causeway.
I know, right?
Yeah,
Very cool.
it's very tactile, like, the art style they've arrived at now is, like, the form is very described, the normal maps are high enough fidelity that every brick has an edge and catches the light. It's gorgeous, and the skyboxes too are gorgeous.
What I
Yeah, I
I'm sorry, continue.
I only just to finish and just say that I hope they get the investment they need to continue to do this. This is my final
Definitely.
things.
And something I want to just really point out to those that maybe aren't as warm to the new RS3 art style. I got some comments of like, oh, I just don't like the way the art style looks or whatever, which is fine. You have your opinion on it. That's totally fine. But I just want to point out that the old school art style, and I don't know if there's a cross pollination there at all, but the old school art style, the new incarnation of it that we were talking about, this very like flat clay vibe, in some ways, I see that in what what the new RS3 style is. It's like a more polished, I guess, a version of that. Where in World of Warcraft you have a painted style, I would say, like a painted. They take their assets, and the textures give this very painterly vibe to them, and you kind of get a little bit of that in the RS3 style. But in my opinion, what really makes the RS3 style its own identity is that you have these big blocky like shapes that kind of evoke a more detailed version of that clay vibe of RuneScape. Like you look at that lighthouse, and I'm still seeing it as like a clay miniature in some ways.
Mm.
So I just want to shout that out too as like a very unique point of inspiration. Anyway, that's we're talking a lot about that, but I sorry, if you have something to
I'm
say.
glad you shared that, to be honest. I mean, it's a Mod Parker and I are doing a lot of back and forth right now about what the relationship is between the old school and the RS3 style, and just kind of doing the charting around what's going on there. And to be honest, your description, I think, is quite apt, actually. It is, in some sense, taking a lot of the same tactile, kind of basically very tactile forms and taking that up to 10. I hadn't thought about that. It's something I'll reflect with Mod Parker on.
Oh,
So
cool.
thank you for
Yeah, no,
progressing
listen,
the conversation.
that's awesome. I'm very happy to have contributed that because like, yeah, that's something that immediately spoke to me. I look at the Ardoin remaster, I'll try to put up some pictures for the people listening to of this. The Ardoin remaster that I believe Mod Black, which also led in realizing it was very interesting because the assets, the ones that she was able to apply, look wonderful. But clearly, the ones that they didn't have a pre-existing tile set for, or I don't even know if they're tile sets in RuneScape 3, for like the rooftops still look very old. So I'm assuming like
Mhm.
over time, I'm hoping that when they create the associated like assets that they can like or puzzle piece. I'm not using the correct artistic term here, am I? Like if you create a set of bricks, you would use that set of
Um,
bricks to create a castle with, right? What is that called?
a modular set.
A modular set? Yeah, like I'm assuming that eventually when they create a Hey rooftop, maybe for their new continent, they can retroactively apply that to her wonderful work on Ardoin and really bring that fully together, combine both the old and the new fully together. And I think the lighthouse is a great example of that because all of it seems to have been redone, right? There's not a single quote unquote old asset that's still sticking out of this region. So I love that of the work there. And I feel like this is a good segue into the HD stuff. I don't want to keep yapping, so can you walk me through your thoughts on the HD work that you guys have done and like what you're most excited for, what you're maybe most concerned for?
Yeah, sure. I think, yeah, that's a pretty good segue, actually, because, RS3 comes up a lot in what is a HD mode for old school RuneScape, if not a definite step towards basically the same heuristic that got RS3 to where it is today, and that was a conversation that I'm not sure what his mod name is, the old school associate art director. So I'm hesitant to say his name, but basically our art director. We have a lot of back and forth about what HD really is for old school. And essentially, our goal is not to progress the art style. Obviously, because we're still not only are we having an SD mode, but we're heavily investing in curating the SD mode as much as the HD mode. But really, it's to offer the first. So there's multifaceted really, what it means for old school and what it means on multiple levels, at the product level, the art and design level, the gameplay level. There's lots of dimensions to it, and I think you could probably summarize HD as the contemporary representation of the classic old school feel. So we're not attempting to move away from that classic feel. We're just going to give it a contemporary lighting and polish for HD. And essentially, the models are exactly the same. We only have one pipeline for the models. It's the animations are exactly the same. The audio is exactly the same. It's just you can toggle on lights and a bunch of other features and missions, water shaders, a bunch of stuff, a greater draw distance, much greater performance. So it's kind of it's akin spiritually to say the Oblivion remaster, though not as aggressive. I don't know if yourself or your visitors would have played Oblivion and thus
Mhm.
therefore the recent remaster.
I haven't played the
Um,
recent remaster, but I'm aware of it. I've played the old school, version of Oblivion for sure as well.
yeah,
That's
okay. So
yeah.
basically, it keeps a lot of the movement system and a lot of things intact. It does alter them somewhat and remaster them, but for the spirit is very much intact. So the plan with old school HD is not to kind of introduce a beginning of a new progressive form of art style that kind of drifts over the next 10 years into RuneScape 3, but simply to provide in the same spirit. Okay, another example would be Minecraft doing their kind of ray traced version,
Yeah.
um, that kind of thing. And we've even spoken a little bit about introducing ray trace technology into old school and the feasibility of that. So that's what the space is for. And I'll be honest, like when you light old school and with care and attention, it suddenly becomes a phenomenally beautiful game in its own unique way, in a way that I personally think if you look at say examples we've already brought up, I suppose Stranglewood or I'm thinking of places there. It was a remaster we did right after DT2. Uh, it's not going to come to me.
It was it an area remaster?
It was an area remaster. We put a big agility course in there. It's the kind of what's it called? It's a
Is it an agility course? Now, do you know what
yeah,
region it was in?
yeah, it's insane. Hang on, I'm just gonna get off the map. This is uh
It's the agility course in Zaya. Isn't that the Shazian area?
Shazian, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, good job.
that's like my favorite area in Karen. So
Oh
I
really?
yeah,
Oh yeah.
I absolutely
I
love Shazian.
It's also one of my favorites. It's I just joined the team. I hadn't really been in the team very long, and also a few other Mod Brow, Mod West, Mod Right. We and also Mod Jerv and Skylark had recently joined the team as well, I believe, or they were kind of on the cusp of joining. It was a very very special time in the old school art team's growth and development, where all these minds and excitement were coming together, and we're in the very beginnings of really kind of fleshing out this oral tradition. And Shazian really got it. We really mulled it over for so long, and I think the result shows because the color palette is very controlled, it's very warm, and then we're very deliberately contrasting different color temperatures, shape design. We developed theories about contrasting noise versus rest space, and we built tools to measure and quantify this noise and balance distribution. We really got into it
Yeah.
with Shazian,
I
and I think it shows. And HD is to wrap up this very long ramble,
mhm.
basically HD is going to take that groundwork that's already solid, and it's going to take it further. But fundamentally, it's not about the tech. It's just the
Mhm.
fundamentals of art really really carefully and skillfully applied.
I will say that that it, I don't want to shout myself out here, but in my video a very inflammatory title. It's called "Will Old School Runescape Fail Again?" And to contextualize that title, I was mainly referring to
It might.
the failure of the post launch of Old School, like how it launched and it wasn't getting a lot of updates, and then it was petering
Mm,
out. It had like 10 to 12,000 concurrent players, and it was only upon getting access to, for example, a like the ability to create their own art assets, that like did things start to progress in a positive way for Old School? Did the game, have a new life, a new lease on life, essentially? And one of the big points I talk about in that video, in a more historiographical sense, is Corrend and its launch versus
mm,
its remixes and remasters that have occurred since then. I talk about like the failures systemically and graphically, in my opinion, of Corrend on launch with what it became down the line. And one of the big points of comparison there was Shazian. Um, and shout out to the person who makes the OSRS map viewer website, because
yes.
you can go way back in the website to like the pre-Corrend days or like the initial Corrend release and see what it was like. And it was like jaw dropping how
Yeah,
like
yeah.
much of a, you know, obviously the team was a lot smaller. They didn't have, I believe it was no artists, like bespoke artists working on the game at that point. They had to create their own like just environment and assets. So shout out to them for doing that. But like, yeah, I mean, when you get artists in that really can just spend all their day working on that thing, the change is so visible, and it looks so much more incredible. And yeah, Shazian is incredible. I think the Hosidius remaster is really, really good. And I really can't wait till the rest of that region gets that same treatment, because it just so visibly is different. um, to touch on like the HD itself, initially you bring up the Oblivion thing, and I was gonna disagree with you, but then you bring up the Minecraft thing, and I completely agree with you. That's exactly what I was gonna bring up, where it's like you keep the aesthetic of the game itself. The assets are essentially the same, but you're just applying a shader to it. You're applying a not a shader, but like a new lighting system, new volumetrics, whatever it may be, to the
Mhm,
game, and it gives it a new depth to appreciate, and maybe even enhances certain environments, to give it, for example, for Minecraft, a more of a survival feel in some areas, a more spooky feel in others,
mm.
right? Another game that came to mind when I saw the HD remaster, and it's not one I've played, so I can't comment on its quality, but it's Octopath Traveler. Are you familiar with that game?
Oh, I'm familiar with it. I've not played it.
Are you familiar with what they did with the art style of that game?
I'm just gonna have to Google it
I'll
just
send
to
you.
sort of
It's all
jog my
good. I'll send
mind.
you a picture. I've been looking at it, so just to try to give you some references. So it uses a 16-bit aesthetic, like pixel art, 16-bit.
Yeah,
However, it applies like modern rendering techniques and
yeah, there's
3D
like a focal
assets.
shift in
Oh
one.
my god, this is that linked. Oh no, it did work. It did work.
Yeah, yeah, that beautiful game.
Yeah, what is it? The focal shift. Did you say it makes it like the blurring
Yeah,
on the edges? Bokeh.
tilt shift, is it?
Yeah,
Or,
tilt shift,
something like that?
tilt shift,
Yeah.
exactly. And then it has these lighting systems, these fog elements in the
Mm,
background. It has these like reflections, and it like really is a unique thing, right? Where you have this really ancient, old school looking 16-bit retro game that has like modern shading tools applied to it, that
mm,
just give it a completely unique art style while still very much being a old school,
mm.
16-bit game, or I believe it's 16-bit. Here's one more image just for reference. And
That's
that's
yeah.
totally reminded me of that.
I love that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, totally. I think, man, graphics are really there's a huge topic, and especially if you're trying to build a game and you're deciding how you want to graphically skin it, it's typically a very big discussion. There's so many facets to it. Um, but as for like what looks good, it's 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 as a concept artist, I have to deal with this question all the time. What looks good and why? And for the on the topic of seeing retro graphics have a resurgence, and obviously then applying contemporary shading techniques, like I can see this as a tilt shift. There's a it looks like a Bezier, a Gaussian blur for the background. These are very contemporary techniques, and it brings you a very rich image. But interestingly, with these retro graphics, if you looked at them on a VCR screen, they would also have a richness to them, like a visual richness.
Mhm.
So sometimes, and especially with old school, you sort of kind of for the first time. I mean, I was working in Oldschool, I kind of snapped out of that kind of illusion we've all been under for the last 20 years, which is this story of graphical progression and better graphics are better. The truth is that to have an emotional response for a piece of media, you merely need to identify with it. It doesn't need any graphics at all, really.
Yeah.
So if the graphics you're representing are charming, and the nice thing about retro graphics is they've fermented in our psyche, they've developed a new kind of cultural semiotic meaning. So when you put in front of me pixel art, or you put in front of me a low res model, that has extra layers of meaning, which I think are as effective as super ray traced. That's why I think HD is cool. I'm glad it's here, but I probably will continue to play an SD because, but maybe for moments, maybe on my boss fights, I'll stick to SD. When I'm doing a quest, I'll go to HD. I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be probably my perspective too, where I would like for maybe for a new quest with new environments, I'm sure those environments are going to, have HD as a huge consideration. So maybe I'd check it out. Also for sailing, I'm probably gonna play with HD because one of my
Mhm.
biggest points of criticism for sailing was the water just starts looking like it like hurts my eyes
Yeah.
eventually because it's just this one flat plane and giving it that like life needed, whether it be with a more like HD kind of RS3-esque render that they do on the water, which I think looks beautiful, or even
Mhm.
just my take on it would just be I say my take as someone who can't even draw a stick figure, but if I did have the artistic talent, my take on it would be making it more in line with the quote unquote modern evolutions of the OSRS aesthetic, of that like clay kind of vibe, give it those like really cool animated like, waves, but keep it in line with the old school style, maybe even give some interaction with the boat with those assets. I don't know how hard that would be, but that would be my take on it. But obviously, I'd take anything other than the flat texture that currently exists.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I think it's a good take. That's pretty much our take too, and that's how we've pretty much executed it. We have that all set up. I don't know if it's been revealed yet.
No, it hasn't. Wait. So, wait. I'm sorry. And maybe I'm misinterpreted. Are you saying that what you guys ended up doing for the water? And I don't think this is going to be a spoiler because you're not showing me any images or anything. Yeah, is you kind of modeled them within like the old school aesthetic?
So we've I can't show you anything.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
I'll have to wait for a future press release. But what we've basically done is we've inherited the water shader from RS3, and then we've heavily modded it basically to fit the old school art style. So it's a
Really?
HD, and it looks really good, but at the same time, it still feels kind of retrograde. So it has all of the kind of beauty of kind of the water shader. It's got kind of procedural waves and stuff. It's one of the things that's better just to show it rather than describe it. However, I'm only doing this as an exercise to say that we totally agreed that sailing over kind of motionless still water, even when I did a depth pass and added depth to water, we built a tool that we could batch update the whole map with, and it was a whole thing. That helped a lot, but even then, I think SD water still suffers a little bit. But even we've done a lot since then as well that I'm really excited to see what people think about regarding bringing life to the ocean in SD.
Yeah, I'm
But
thrilled to hear that, and I'm very very excited to see what that is because while I would be happy with just like a RS3 water texture on the game, it would still look better in my opinion. And I think like water is one of those assets that like you can make it look really modern with an old looking game and still have those two things blend well. Like, you can have like this super high fidelity water in Minecraft and it would still look like Minecraft. It would still translate. But and I think some people have already done that. But but it's always even cooler when it's adapted in a more, considered sense too.
yeah, it's a really tricky one. But it exists in the HD space, so hopefully, if people feel like it's betrayed their sense of the game dramatically, then SD mode is there, and that would take them right back to the nostalgic view. Sort of. I mean, there's water depth now, and dolphins swimming around, and all sorts of things happening. So, you know,
That's
they'll
reasonable.
have to.
That's a good. That's good. I feel like that needs. Some things do need to be changed based on the content that is being created around them. I'm pretty excited. I'm very sailing forward. I'm pretty positive about it overall. I would say. So I'm pretty excited to see what you guys do. I know. Um, you like a release apparently is relatively close. I would say from what we heard
Yeah.
about anyway. Um, the H2 client, on the other hand, I feel like, and tell me if you can't even talk about this, but I feel like there have been some hiccups or delays that have happened since I think we were supposed to get more hands-on with it earlier on in the year, but it seems like there's been some kind of like maybe SD client related delays with it, or am I crazy?
It's really I'm definitely not a stakeholder or spokesperson for the production of this
Mhm.
piece. I merely annoy them with feedback, visual feedback. Uh, but I will speak on their behalf and mention that technically it's an extremely ambitious project. And sailing technically was also an extremely extremely ambitious
Yeah.
project. And Jagex only has so many engineers. If, in my opinion, Jagex needs about 3 times as many engineers as it currently has. But that's just the situation we're in. So yeah, we're spinning a lot of plates right now, and unfortunately, that means we've had to push a few things back, to be honest. Which weighs heavily on us, to be honest.
Uh,
It's extremely complex, but it's
is
coming
is the
next year.
is
It's
the
coming.
SD element complex or is the HD element complex? Because I heard that the HD element is actually a lot easier to implement as compared to the SD recreation that you guys are doing of the quote unquote like traditional old school aesthetic.
Yeah, I'm not involved in the engine programming here, so I
Okay.
can't really tell you exactly what they're saying, but I do have a lot of conversations with them about it, and from what I can gather, they are extremely it's recreating a lot of the artifacts, visual artifacts in SD. It has to be handled in post typically now, unless you want to backtrace all of the tech required to prop up HD. So it does require the writing of a lot of post shaders, I presume. Again, I'm not intimate with the tech stack and how they've actually achieved this feat of engineering. But yeah, for sure, it's man. So I don't know how much I can really describe, but because of the Z, we've changed out the Z buffer. So basically, the way that the game tests for depth now is basically it probes into the depth of each pixel in the screen, as opposed to what it did before, which was it had hard coded render layers on every object. It would say an object would say like render me on top, and then another one would be like render me kind of in the middle. Now it doesn't do that. It does a kind of yeah a typical contemporary screen depth pass. However, we have quite literally thousands and thousands of models modeled with what's called coplanar faces. It means two polygons which are exactly aligned. So what that means is if you do depth sorting through the screen, you end up with a horrible artifact. It's like a tearing artifact effect where the two planes fight to be on top of each other. Um, and that's everywhere. So just pruning, literally just pruning through the game and finding every instance of that alone has resulted in the requirement of editing thousands and thousands of assets. So that
Mhm.
alone is a mammoth task, and that's not barring all the other technical. That's just a sliver of the can of worms they kicked open embarking on HD.
I do hope that we do get the at least maybe a beta, a late stage beta of it prior to the sailing release because I would love to experience sailing with like, the proper water and all that, but obviously it might not
Mhm.
be possible, but I would love that. I think that would be a very cool simultaneous, I guess you could say, release and marketing tool to make the game because I feel like for every you and me there is where we're just like obsessed with the old vibe of RuneScape. There's probably like 10 times more people that don't want to play RuneScape because it looks old,
Yeah,
and I
totally.
feel
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
feel like a client like the HD117 remaster of the game. Are you familiar with that
The
plugin?
117 remaster stuff.
Yeah, the plugin.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, like for every like I feel like a lot of people have like played the game or given it a shot because of something like that. And for as much as I personally dislike all the textures and all that kind of stuff, I think the shading is a bit too harsh and the coloring is a bit weird. I love the fact that it exists because it allows people that otherwise would be kind of repelled by the game to still give it a shot, and then eventually grow to appreciate. I think a bunch of the WoW creators that have come in more recently, I guess you could say I'm one of them, but the more recent ones, uh, started playing with the HD set, client and then or a HD117 plugin, and then now have transitioned back to the old school aesthetic because they've just
Really.
grown so accustomed to it.
Hey, that's funny. Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting anecdotal bit of data. I'd love to know why. I'd love to put a survey out or something like that and just get people's thoughts on it. I think, I agree. I think the HD will make the game a lot more palatable. It will make it a lot more marketable to people that aren't inoculated to the art style. It does There's a moment where it clicks and you kinda get it and you become part of, sounds a bit cringe really, but the in club where you kind of understand what the whole gestalt kinda means and what the value system is going on there. Once you get that, you kind of, it's quite easy to embrace it. But in the beginning of everyone's old school RuneScape journey, there's certainly a moment of, you have to kind of push through the cringe sometimes if you're not ready to embrace it.
Yeah, and now,
Um,
and as someone who always loved the old school like, aesthetics for games, even I started playing the game with HD. And then I vividly, just looking back at some of my earliest footage that I recorded, and I only started recording like a couple months after I started playing, um, is you can just see progressively over the course of like 2 or 3 months, me going from like an HD 117 to a stripped back version to a GPU, like you just see my progression of just like stripping it back away and back away and back away the more I became, accustomed and fell in love with just the general aesthetic of the game.
mhm. Yeah, that's yeah, really interesting. And that creates it's a
Oh my
very weird
god.
thing. It creates staying power in the sense that once you kind of get the taste of old school or RS3 or any of those in the IP, they have a nature where they're kind of, they can hook you in after that fact. So what was I saying? Oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's so right off the bat, the art style can be quite hard to swallow, but once you get a taste for it, it can be quite Moorish.
Mhm.
Um, but as you've completely correctly identified that we, the few connoisseurs of the style, maybe are in this position, but the vast majority of people will be completely repelled by it, and HD will aid that for sure.
It's like
And I
a double whammy when it comes to people coming into RuneScape to check it out. I think a new skill, I always say this, is that it's a perfect time to go into RuneScape. People can always feel very overwhelmed with RuneScape, but a new skill kind of gives people that ground zero that they might look for in like an expansion release in a different game, right? An
Mm,
expansion release in old school is just more content on top of pre-existing content that doesn't replace a lot. So people just still feel just as overwhelmed with all the different tracks and possibilities. But a new skill doesn't fully, you know, give you a ground zero, but it gives you more of a ground zero. It's going to be content that you can start off just about immediately, and it's content that you're going to be exploring with fresh, just like everyone around you, like an expansion launch would have.
mm. Yeah. Yeah, and on the back of that, I mirror your sentiments. It would be good to launch that experience with HD and have it at its optimal. It looks unlikely right now. However, I don't think HD is gonna be, or that open beta you're asking for is gonna be too far behind, thankfully.
Yeah, hopefully.
And I will say that potentially, because sailing is such a, in some ways, such a radical addition to the game, potentially it's good that we can swallow it this one change at a time and then have
Oh,
HD come
sure.
a bit later. So maybe there's a benefit to it, we'll see.
That's a good point. That's a good point. For the people that are more cautious about sailing, I guess, like people that are like a bit iffy on it. I
Mm,
feel like the people that are just super, super against it, it's maybe a lost cause. Maybe in a couple of years they'll warm up to it. But the people that are more on the edge of like, oh, I'm nervous, but I'll check it out. Not launching the game and being offered like now you can like have shadows and sunbeams and fog and all that kind of stuff and clouds. That would probably be a much more palatable thing. It's like, okay, it still looks like the game it looks like. That could be definitely
mm,
very helpful for that. So I kind of want to ask you now more of a broad question about like not personal projects, but like personal interests that you have from the artistic space. What games are you most inspired by? What games have you been playing recently, if any, and or if you even play games, other sources of inspiration that you have?
mhm. Um, yeah, sure. Okay, I can talk about that. So, I'm pretty much so I'm a full-time game developer outside. So in the context of Jagex, and typically the way I interface with games companies, I do that as a concept artist. So that's my trade. But outside of that, I'm pretty much just an indie developer. I spend all my time building games. Typically, I'm either playing games. I love strategy games, mass strategy games, RTS games. Love of MMOs. Typically, I only play old school RuneScape these days, though I would really love to sample WoW Classic and get on WoW Hardcore. I'd love to
Mhm.
try that out, and there's a few other MMOs in the space right now I'm quite keen to try. However, typically once you work on an MMO, you do get completely involved in it. So if I'm playing an MMO, it's typically old school. Um, But yeah, on the outside of that, I love sim and management games. I also keep fish. I'm a fish keeper, so I'm building a game about running a fish shop on a kind of newly colonized planet that has no biosphere, which sounds
Cool.
really niche and nerdy, and it is. But yeah, I think it's
No,
great.
I feel like
Um,
those are exactly the kind of games that do have like a big niche to tap into.
For sure, yeah. I think there's a market there that if you're an indie dev, you can maybe function. So that's my long term kind of side project piece, really. That I just work on that when old school gives me a moment to breathe.
I
Um,
I was gonna say that if I ever get into the space YouTube wise where I can just, and this is my dream really, is I could just make videos about stuff that I like rather than feeling any level of pigeonholing. Like if I can do like a Jacob Geller, I don't know if you're familiar with his content, esque YouTube channel where he can just make a any video about any video game and he gets views and gets like a point of traction there. Um, I have so many different ideas I'd want to discuss, and one of them being like I have a bunch of ideas on my phone, and I think I titled this one "Niche is the New Normal" or like "Niche is the New Mainstream" or something, where that whole concept that of like general appeal, I think has kind of disappeared or should disappear in the video games because any niche in a video game is large enough to sustain just about any budget you can imagine, right? Like you look at
mhm,
Baldur's Gate 3, conceptually that is a hyper niche game. It's like a super complex,
yeah,
quasi strategy RPG, turn based, which is already not particularly a popular genre amongst a mainstream audience, and it had a million concurrent players on Steam. You cannot call that game anything but the most mainstream of mainstream, you know. um
mhm,
so like the idea, and Elden Ring's another example. It's a super difficult, RPG that is kind of obtuse, doesn't give you directions, just kind of lets you do your own thing, and it's hard and punishing or whatever. And yet, 1 point something odd million concurrent users on Steam. You cannot, 20 million copies sold within the first year. Like, you cannot say that game is anything but the most mainstream of the mainstream. So, my
mhm.
perspective is that the demographics playing video games now are so broad and so large that any niche can, make you a millionaire overnight, essentially. That's my perspective.
For sure. I want to encourage you to make those videos, and even if you want to do that on a second channel or even on Theory-wise, I think you'd have some good takes. The whole idea that so the games industry is currently very much dictated by capital, and because games make so much money, they very quickly become an asset class to make money. Now, that's antithetical to the creative. It's an art form just like any other, just like making a film, just like, composing an album, writing a novel. A video game is a form of art, and it has to be able to find its own identity and stand on its own 2 legs before you can appraise it. Now, the problem with a capital-run creative industry is that capital typically, especially vast sums of capital, want some kind of promise on their return, which enforces creative limitations that typically are restrictive. Sometimes that's creative, sometimes, but for the majority of cases, AAA really struggles because they're capital driven and not creativity driven. That space, I think is ripe for all sorts of video essays, but not just video essays, but the actual sweat and labor of game developers. There's a lot of us that are trying to understand that space more deeply and understand exactly how the market for games works, because no one's quite worked it out yet. And I think what you're elucidating there is something very true. I think old school RuneScape is also representative of this. It has such a unique identity, and there's not a point against it. It in fact gives it a unique identity and allows it to stand and carry its own niche tentpole. If
Mhm.
you can do that with a video game, there's a hope there. There is some hope there. It's a lot more nuanced, obviously. We've already spoken for quite a few hours, so it's a topic that I could spend another quite literally 5 hours going on
Mhm.
about.
No, it's fine.
I'm sure you could too.
Yeah, and I know we're on a time limit, but always welcome to come back in that regard because Josh isn't and I, we had a 5 hour episode when we recorded a couple weeks ago because we would just like our original plan was like we'll just see how long it goes, and we ended up talking about like everything like in the kitchen sink. So like it just, and we were still like coming up with things to talk about, so we had to cut it off at like midnight. But so yeah, for sure, and I definitely understand having so many different perspectives on that. You know, I want to say that like the sphere of gaming, right, is interesting in that it kind of responds to it. The benefit of being driven by capital is that you can for sure. I'm responding to your DM. I'm sorry in public. Um, yeah, for sure, for sure. But the benefit, I guess, of being funded by capital is that you can have access to a huge sum of funding if you can market. But the obviously, as you pointed out very accurately, the detriment is that risk taking is a huge risk, you know, especially for larger projects, especially for long form creative projects like games. It's different than like an album, I guess you could say, for music, because those things can either be made over the course of a year, 5 years, 10 years, or a day. You know, it really just depends on the artist. And with a game, you're collaborating, and with larger games, you're collaborating between 200, 1,000, at this point now, 2,000, 3,000 people. It's a multi-million dollar investment. And I both get the risk, but also I wish the risk would recognize that the only success found there oftentimes is in like those creative voices that are pushing the medium forward.
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I also want to quickly add that like what's interesting to me about like trend setting, I guess you could say. Baldur's Gate 3, you could say, is a AAA trendsetter. Elden Ring is a AAA trendsetter. Is that oftentimes those like more, I guess, curated, you know, corporate curated games that are always responding to those, and we've seen semi positive responses, you know, from the more mainstream corporate curated crowd of like, okay, well, Elden Ring was successful. Let's look at what was successful there and try and mimic it. They don't often do it particularly well, but just having that opportunity, you know, having that space to push that genre forward. That's why I give so much respect to those trendsetters. The last thing I'll say about that is old school RuneScape is such an interesting point of reference. Something I noted early, and I eventually made a video about it. I think it's called like "Why Are There No MMOs Like Old School RuneScape" or something like that. Um, is what the title is. It's like why for as success. It's one of the most successful MMOs, right? It's the second or third most popular in the West, at least MMO. It's I think more popular than FF14, so I say second most popular, and yet it's not getting that recreative sick cycle of games trying to be like it. And I try to analyze like why is that the case? Why do we get 97 different WoW clones, or at least we used to, but nowadays that is just an alien concept for RuneScape. Before I give you my perspective, because I've been yapping enough, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm curious to hear your perspective, actually. There are clones of old school that come out every now and again, but typically they're so close to the copyright infringement that Jagex has to take them down.
Oh, they're like really
So
small projects in that regard, like really small, almost like
they're just typically literally just the old school graphics, and sometimes even the actual assets themselves,
oh, okay,
just kind of
interesting.
repackaged onto another game or something like that. But I've never seen, or I've yet to see. I don't
A
know.
large scale
It's
project, I guess.
Yeah, kind of like a highly funded company really tackle. I don't think anyone will either. I think it's such a crazy niche. I think give a dev team the ability to do something fresh from the get-go, and I'd be really, really surprised, unless they were hardcore old school RuneScape players, I'd be really surprised if anyone took this particular approach.
It's
Because it's a product of like just so many games that there's so many incarnations of what is before, all the way back to being, the mud, even back its mud days. It's the way the thing grew and evolved to arrive at it kind of sui generously out of nowhere. I'd be really amazed if that ever happened,
for sure.
or even just to maybe be inspired by it. Sorry,
Oh,
go ahead.
no, 100%. And it's such a multifaceted issue. And the question is so difficult. And in the video, I say as much. I'm like, look, there's no like one answer that's going to be super satisfying for this.
Mhm.
My perspective is like the question, kind of multifaceted. I kind of a lot of people criticize, not a lot of people, I guess. Some people criticize the video because I spent like half of it talking about just what influence means in video games and how it manifests, and like Dark Souls and how that's been so influential and how it's been influential and how that influence has been transformed over time. So the quick context there would be like, you know, you have Dark Souls, and there are two pillars to the game, right, that have really resonated with people. I'm sorry if you can still hear the dog. There are two people that have
It's
resonated with
fine.
the game. There's people, and two successes, actually, you could say. There's the people that love the combat, The very meticulous, slow-paced, punishing combat. And there's people that really resonated with the exploration element, the three-dimensional Metroidvania that is Dark Souls, that both punishing but meticulous and super, super, super satisfying to explore with its RPG mechanics. And obviously, together they create the game that a lot of people love. Um, the influence, though, as I've noted in this video, mainly drifts into the former combat. Most Dark Souls games, Souls-likes games that aren't created by From Software, which are the studio that created the original Dark Souls games, is just combat. It's just, we're going to create slow, meticulous combat and give you kind of a linear corridor to go down, and you're going to fight with that meticulous combat, that slow, punishing combat, but you're not really going to be engaging with the vast, crazy, looping, Metroidvania-esque exploration that the game is also known for, or the series is also known for. And when I noted that, I was like, okay, there's an answer there somewhere that might connect with old school. Because to me, the reason why people drift to combat, and this is not discounting those developers or saying that combat is super easy to create, it's really not. Good combat in a video game is unbelievably challenging. But when it comes to what it entails, it's a lot of playtesting, a lot of really, really, really specific visions from a director in managing and animations and having these really talented animation designers come in and create all that. But it's something that you can kind of like whittle out. A good combat system to me is more of a one-to-one, especially for Dark Souls, where it's very simple. It's a light attack, heavy attack, maybe a block or a parry. It's a very simple combat at the end of the day. And it's easy, and therefore it's easier to recreate. The kind of level design that was arguably pioneered by Dark Souls 1 or even Demon Souls, that to me is just beyond most people. Not because they're stupid or whatever, or not creative, but because to come up with that, it is such like a singular and challenging vision to create such an interconnected world. It not only requires playtesting, which it does, obviously, and multiple different eyes to gaze over it, but it requires a level of like understanding of like functional elements of RPGs. It's untenable, right? For most people. And that's fine. And that's fine. I don't want to like shit talk anyone in this regard. Old school RuneScape, very similar thing, right? Where what does it mean to be inspired by old school RuneScape? Well, some games can say it's just having long grinds, but that's not really a signature. I mean, it is a signature, but it's not what makes old school RuneScape what it is. It's the interconnected elements of the different skilling systems, and how they pollinate through the entire world. It is the most fulfilling sandbox in that it is a curated sandbox. That's how I call the subgenre RuneScape inhabits. It's one of the only MMOs that inhabits it, the curated sandbox. It's developer driven and dictated. The paths are curated by developers, but they are so, cross-pollinated and intersectional that you can kind of take your own and not feel like you're wasting time or going unoptimal with it. The last thing I'll say about this very long kind of summary of the video is that the takeaway I had is that the inspiration from old school is actually one that fits the art, for example. This existence of being hyper inspired by the old school PS1 era, Dreamcast era art styles of games that were at that point driven by restrictions and tech limitations, have now become these like artistic, evocative, and transformative, art voices, in game design or whatever. Things like Iron Lung, is a great example of a game that really works due to the art style, in my opinion. And that's where people got inspired by old school. Old school is one of those trendsetters of showcasing that art doesn't need to be the highest fidelity to still be something that's evocative and inspirational and stuff like that. So that's the camp I would put old school in, because being inspired by its systems, as you pointed out, actually, how do you recreate those? Like consciously recreate those when half of them were created in my opinion, unconsciously. Like I don't think it was purposeful that old school RuneScape is what it is today. It's just something that developers ran with once they realized. And recreating that is as untenable as recreating the level design in Dark Souls 1. And recreating the level design in Dark Souls 1 is so untenable that the director wasn't able to do it in the future games. Like he just didn't do it, he did a different thing. And only arguably in Elden Ring did he tap into something else with that. So like, yeah, so that's the summary. Sorry, that's a very long rant.
Beautiful, beautiful summary. Yeah, and to be honest, yeah, you kind of came around in the end there to a lot of kind of what I was pointing at in the beginning, and to answer what is it I do and what's the job of a concept artist, it's trying to decode that unconscious kind of culmination of years and years of development, back and forth of players, all these conscious, unconscious decisions. We have to rationalize that, put that down in our Bible, make an oral tradition, and make it consistent. And it's extremely difficult.
Mm.
It takes years. It takes years and years of soaking in the problem. Um, and there's okay. So and a further point I want to make is just how important it is to stand alone and be unique in what you do. And Old School does that brilliantly. There's other games, Dwarf Fortress. There's tons of games. There's tons of games that you have a very special developers and communities form around it that cherish it and hold it. And it's not principally a capitalistic, you know, yeah, financial asset. It's a true culture a true human culture and endeavor has formed around an idea, and it's really special. So Old School is a game. Yes, we can categorize it like that. It's an MMO, but it's actually really a form of cultural expression. We've all come together over now decades to kind of make this world of Gielinor come to life, and
Yeah,
that's incredible.
for sure. And I tap into that a little bit with the conversation I have with language that was developed with the game, but also
Yes.
simultaneously like the aesthetic of the game. Something I bring about or talk about in my third video, with the most popular video I've ever made, where I talk about quitting WoW and going to old school. In that video, I spent a lot of time talking about the art and music of the game because I think those two things are such a foundational pillar of the culture of RuneScape, of old school RuneScape, where they really transcend a lot of the game itself. I don't think that for as much as I think the systems of old school are really just they're the binding pillars of no, I shouldn't say that. They are the pillars of it, and the art and the music and everything is what binds it all together. Without it, it wouldn't work. Um, the the art, though, simultaneously to the music, it also transcends them in some ways. If you,
Mhm,
you don't have to ever have played old school RuneScape to either recognize the theme, to recognize
mm,
the art style, because I don't know if any game has ever replicated, any popular game has ever replicated the old school art style at all. Nor would I think it would be easy for them to do so, for as simple as the art style appears to be. And as you pointed out, it's like this combination of limitations and innovations by two like or three developers at the very beginning, the Gower brothers, right?
mhm,
That really brought it about and created what we know today. The music, people can recognize the old school music without ever having played the game. I did, I could
mhm,
for sure. Just having absorbed it culturally. People, there are creators out there with millions upon millions of subscribers that haven't made a single old school RuneScape video in their life, and yet they have music references to the game. Most recently, Iron
mhm.
Pineapple has like 3 million subscribers, awesome channel, awesome creator, and his whole intro was animated by I'm forgetting who animated it. One of the very big old school animators, the guy who made the Old Smokey, the guy who made the skateboard
Oh, yeah.
animation. If you
Oh, I
he
love that. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
he made an entire animated old school animated sequence for an Iron Pineapple series that Iron Pineapple is doing, where he tests out a bunch of Souls like games that are independent. So
Mm.
like,
Oh, cool.
just it is, yeah.
He really gets the jank, by the way. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes,
Just
yes.
to go back to your earlier point, he gets it, like, the way he's doing those animations.
It's
He's leaning into it.
so much, and I wanted to shout out another animator that's much less known. The animator that Showback, who's one of the WoW creators that came in, works with. I'm forgetting his name now. I feel really bad, but he does a lot of the animations for Showback's like little YouTube videos that he does alongside his stream. And I can send you one if
Mhm.
you haven't seen it. That's the
Please, yeah.
one guy I feel that like just gets so well the jittery jankiness of it. I'll send it to you. They're really funny, but yeah, that's beside the point. You know, i- the art style for old school, the music for old school is so recognizable. It's so like immediate and so unique to what it has birthed. That yeah, I mean, what does it mean to be inspired by it? Like, how do you do that? I don't know. Systemically anyway. Um, the last question I want to ask you before we wrap up is, if there was like one thing, and you know what, you can address this as an artist, but also you can talk about it, and maybe you can answer one point artistically, another point just systemically or whatever way as a player. If there was one thing you would change about old school RuneScape right now, like with a snap of a finger, what would it be and why?
God, that's a terrible question. That's a
Um,
terrible question
this is
to
gonna give you
label
some
me.
hate, maybe.
Yeah, crikey. Uh, hmm. I want to approach this earnestly. Just bear with me. I'm going to scratch my mind on this.
Yeah, no worries. He's gonna say evolution of combat. Everybody, get ready.
No, no. I have a lot of things I remember one time on stream, someone asked me a similar question, and I think I said, I want to bring it. This is when I first joined Old School, so I hadn't really kind of got my priorities straight.
Mhm.
And I said I'd like weapon sheathing, and to this day, I still kind of want weapon sheathing.
That'd be cool.
I want to be able to like, holster. You can do that in WoW, right?
Yeah,
I want to be able to. You can. So when I
you can
first
do that in
joined, there was
RuneScape
no
3.
set emote. Can you? God,
Yeah,
see,
yeah,
I think Old School would just with a few of those kind of like, because what those things do, if you can sit down around a fire, if you can sheath your weapon, if you can decide to not wear combat clothes while you're doing the civilian, this is how I play Old School. It's
yeah.
ridiculous, but I'm a role player at heart, so I get into it.
I get it.
If you can sheath your weapon, if you can do all these things, it's that much. It puts you that much more in the world. And for me, I know Old School's loop isn't really about role playing and being immersed in the world. It's that's not really what's going on that makes it so great. Though it is an aspect. I'm an artist, so that's the aspect that I would like to see. Though that's not really my answer to your question, because that's such a large. It could be I'd like to remaster White Wolf Mountain so you don't clip halfway up the side of a mountain when you're walking up it. It's
Yeah,
completely if as a new player going over White Wolf Mountain is a you'll get a PTSD. It's so bizarre. It teaches you that the game is not going to treat you like a stupid player. You have to glitch up this wall here. That's fine.
yeah.
So I'd like to kind of clean up stuff like that. But even that, I mean, is that really what I would do? Very, very difficult question. In fact, the longer I'm working on Old School, the harder I find it to actually give you a satisfying answer to that. So that's a cop out, really, isn't it?
No,
I
no,
wouldn't
I get
change
it.
anything.
Oh, I get it. Like I feel like everything, and again, I keep bringing him up, and I feel bad. I don't want to like speak for him, but another topic I touched on with Husky about was like the positive and negatives, the positives and negatives of changing just about anything, right? Like
Mhm,
I always talk about changing Calfight Queen, right? I always talk about changing the Calfight Queen because that's like the perfect example of a fight to me that has aged against its original intent. So, in my opinion, as a result of that, it doesn't really inhabit an old school vibe anymore. That's my perspective. Some
mhm,
people completely disagree, and other people, and as a result, I think that modernizing it a little bit would be really cool. I also feel like adding a new mid game boss when you could just rework an existing one to make them something that people actually want to do. Um,
mhm,
it removes any bloat that could possibly build up over time. I think additive additions that overshadow existing ones is how bloat is made. So I have all these reasons, but at the end of the day, there is something charming about having a boss that just kind of nukes the shit out of you, and that was his perspective. I'm like, I can't really argue against that. That's valid. There is a level of, something there that there's always that positive and negative of if you alleviate too much friction, you become that marble that retail WoW has become, in my opinion. So, um,
mhm.
so I get it, right? Like I like the answer though because it is very like driven by or proof of how much you love the game because your changes here are so like arguably minor or just speak to your own passions as an artist. Sheathing weapons would be kind of sick, honestly. So for sure, my changes are always like systemically driven. That's my always my perspective where I'm just like, man, rework agility, please, or like maybe
Yeah.
like find a way to make mining and smithing something that people do. Don't make it feel like a
Yeah.
noob trap.
Oh my god, hey, actually, thank you. You've just inspired me. I do think smithing is completely broken and irrelevant, and it
Yeah.
really upsets me.
That's
So yeah.
always been my perspective where I'm just like, if we are to give that old school mentality, we need to also interpret intent. And the intent was obviously that you smith your own shit. That's like the
Yeah,
entire
yeah.
point of smithing, right? But the fact that you make like 3 items from 1 to 99 and all of them have nothing
Yeah.
to do with the metals you mine is wild.
It's
Like, come on.
it's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly.
I think RuneScape 3 kind of has it correct in some ways. I don't like necessarily how AFK a lot of it has become from a skilling perspective, but I love the
Mhm,
mining and smithing rework from like a systemic standpoint. And I always say that about skilling in RS3. I love the systems behind them, but I just don't like the methods oftentimes that are just
mhm.
too AFK to me. So take inspiration from that. And I'm not gonna. It's a whole different topic. Josh and I have spoken about mining and smithing forever now. Um, you know, like things like agility to me, things like fire making desperately need something to actually exist in the
Dude,
public conscious outside of a instanced
yeah.
boss.
It's
Called, you know, yeah,
it's so wild, man, working on sailing and knowing in the game there's skills as simple as fire making, and just the cognitive dissonance you have when you have to tell a player that, they'll ask you, "Is this gonna be an old school RuneScape skill?" And when you look at it critically, you really critically just look at it, look at the facts. It's like, man, like, the whole of sailing skill could literally be you have an animation that jumps on a raft and you have to balance on it and then jump off. Like, that wouldn't actually be betraying something that simple wouldn't be betraying the core of old school. We would never do that.
yeah,
But the reality, we talk about preserving it, but then when it actually comes to the reality of developing for old school RuneScape, there's a subtle expectation that typically doesn't align strictly with the reality. Um,
exactly.
so
What you just pointed out there is perfect. It's exactly what I always try to like tap into when I talk about the different, like the idea that evolution has been a bad word because of the evolution of combat. It's like the
mm,
amount that old school has evolved since 2013 cannot be understated, right? Like it has
mm,
changed so drastically. The understanding of what it means to be an old school RuneScape update has changed. Like the feeling hasn't changed. It still feels old school, but back in 2013, people were literally voted no to moving the camera with the middle mouse button. That failed the first poll. It had to be repolled. Imagining the game without that now is absurd. Imagine the game without
mm,
the multitude of plugins that would be bannable offenses in 2007 is absurd, right? Like it has changed drastically. Our engagement has changed drastically. The kinds of content, like even I was doing it yesterday, try to get 99 fletching. Veil totems is like an unbelievably simple and yet incredible addition to the game that alleviates something I hate about skilling as a concept in RuneScape, where you sometimes have to create outputs that have no value. Broad bolts, you
mm,
might as well drop them. Broad arrows, you might as well drop them. Your bows, you might as well drop them. Like it's, but now you created a recycling system, an Ouroboros,
yes.
where you create something and it's used for something else, and that to me is actually speaking to the intent of RuneScape so much more than just saying like, well, keep it because that's how it's always been. It's like, but no, it's been
Mm,
that way because it was created that way for a very specific reason. And the only reason it was that way in 2007 is because they haven't gotten around to changing it yet. Like you think people they didn't want to make a sailing in 2007? If the developers in 2007 saw sailing, they'd be
they'd
amazed.
be
They'd be
psyched.
right. Like it's not a it's not a it was a limitation. It's not
Yeah.
anyway. That's a whole different topic. We kind of went on. I know we should be wrapping up, so I just want to say thank you so much for joining. It was a pleasure to have a detailed and fun conversation about stuff that I think a lot of people don't talk about with old school, which is the art and
Mhm,
stuff like that.
Likewise, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been great.
Awesome. You're always invited back whenever. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day, man.
Awesome. Likewise. Take care.